Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Had a Quirk and Kacchan Didn't? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Two teenagers walked across the street, hands linked together. The sky gave a soft amber glow as the sun slowly began to set. A cool summer breeze ruffled their hair a bit as they continued to walk. The taller of the two was talking rapidly while their unoccupied hand made wild gestures to go along with what he was saying. The boy had green curly hair that made him look awfully a lot like broccoli. His eyes matched his hair but shined brightly as he talked animatedly. He had light freckles and everything about him screamed, "I am a cinnamon roll." He wore a collared shirt and tie with a pair of light blue jeans. His companion was watching him quietly with a soft smile on his face. The smaller of the two had spiky ash blonde hair and crimson-red eyes that hid behind thin-framed glasses. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt with a pair of headphones hanging from his neck. Instead of jeans like his companion, he had a pair of black sweatpants on with red Converse shoes. Kamui Wood's quirk is so amazing, Kacchan. He would have caught the villain for sure if MT Lady didn't step in. Her quirk is amazing too. Do you think any object she has with her grows as well? What if she can shrink villains? But I highly doubt it cause her quirk only affects her and it might be dangerous to try it on anyone else, but maybe she can do more with it. Do you think she has any other moves besides shrinking and growing? Her quirk can be really useful to protect people from buildings collapsing and she can fight off villains with mutant quirks. I'm sure she can Aizu, but she needs to get her head out of her own butt for that. Oh come on Kacchan, she's young. Give her a chance. Katsuki chuckled at the pout Izuku was giving him. Alright. I'm just saying she needs to understand it's not all about fame. The other boy just huffed in response before starting to rant about another topic. As he ranted, Katsuki watched him and fell back into his thoughts. Never in a million years did he think this could happen. When he learned he was quirkless, he was so sure that Izuku would leave him. His mother always told him that quirkless people were useless, so when he found out he was quirkless, he immediately assumed no one would like him anymore. Sadly, he was partly correct. His classmates still avoid him, some even going as far as bullying him. He could typically defend himself. He may be quirkless, but he still taught himself how to fight. The only person that stuck to his side and defended him was Izuku. Never once through their years of friendship did he leave him or insult him. Even when Izuku got his quirk and he didn't, Izuku simply said it didn't matter if he didn't have a quirk. He simply looked thoughtful for a moment before grabbing his hand and saying, "You're still my hero, Kacchan." Slowly, their friendship developed into something more. It had been a year since Izuku confessed, and it's been the best goddamn year of Katsuki's life. Sure, they had their ups and downs, but it always worked out in the end. Katsuki was snapped out of his thoughts by a hand waving in front of his face. "Kacchan," said person blinked before looking at Izuku apologetically. "Sorry, got lost in my thoughts. What were you saying?" "Well, I was asking if you've decided on what high school to go to." They had talked about their plans for the future many times, but Katsuki never told him what high school he wanted to go to. We're pretending the scene with the teacher never happened. He may have hinted it a couple of times but never outright said it. He wanted it to be a surprise for when Izuku got into UA. Katsuki says, when, and not if, because he knew Izuku would get in. Welp, so much for surprises. Sure, he could lie, but he hates lying. He looked at Izuku, who was waiting for an answer, and responded with, "Well, I was thinking to go to you today. I may be no hero, but their medical course is the best in the country." At those words, Izuku's eyes lit up and he looked at Katsuki with pure joy on his face. "Really? So we'll be going to the same school then?" "Well, that is if we get in. And not that I don't think you can get in. You're amazing and incredibly smart. I'm sure you'll do great. I was just saying that I might not get in, but I'm surreal jetting. You're amazing." Izuku stopped walking at this point while rambling nervously. Katsuki simply giggled and leaned up to kiss him. Izuku stopped talking and kissed back softly. The sun set behind the two, creating a perfect moment between them. When they pulled back, they stared at each other for a moment before continuing walking. As they approached their separate homes, he felt dread fill his stomach. He sighed as he thought of yet another lonely night. His mother, he hated calling her that, wasn't home, and his dad, well, he wasn't really around anymore. He died in a car accident when Katsuki was 5. Ever since then it's just been him and his mother. At a young age, Katsuki learned to be independent and made up for his mother's lack of presence. When she was home, those were the worst nights. Those nights were the nights full of yelling and beatings. Katsuki shivered at the thought and noticed Izuku eyeing him, a worried look in his eyes. "Do you want to stay the night at my house? I'm sure Mom won't mind you staying over." Katsuki knew Izuku wasn't dumb. He knew Izuku knew something was wrong when it came to his home life. But he never pushed for answers, and Katsuki was grateful for that. The ashy blonde felt a smile grow on his face. "I would like that very much." Izuku, Katsuki noted, has been acting strange recently. He was more tired in the daytime and would sneak out early in the morning. This had started sometime near the end of school and continued on in the summer. Whenever he voiced his concerns, Izuku would assure him everything was fine. While Katsuki was worried, he wanted to wait until Izuku was ready to tell him. But now that summer was coming to an end, Katsuki was getting annoyed and impatient. He tried to be patient, he really was, but his patience is running thin. So when he woke up one morning after staying over at the Midoriya's, to Izuku trying and failing to sneak out, he decided he had enough. He sat up groggily, alerting Izuku, who was changing into a t-shirt, that he was awake. Before the other boys said anything, Katsuki spoke up. "Zuku." "Sorry, Kacchan, did I wake you?" He grumbled, "What do you think?" while rubbing his eyes sleepily. He blinked, realizing his glasses weren't on. He waved his hand around in the general direction of the side table, searching for his glasses. Izuku chuckled and walked over to the side table. He picked the glasses up and handed Katsuki the pair of glasses. Now that his vision was restored, Katsuki let his eyes wander to the alarm clock on the side table. It read 4:50 a.m. "Where are you going?" The person in question nervously rubbed a hand behind his head. "I was going on a walk." "Bullshit." Izuku looked at him, surprised at the sudden outburst. "Kacchan." "Look, Izuku, you can do whatever you want, but at least tell me where you're going. And don't even think about lying to me." "I was trying to be patient, I really was. But I'm so sick of this." Katsuki was on his feet now. Izuku looked at him cluelessly. "Sick of what?" Katsuki stared at him for a few moments before getting angry again. "What?" "I'm sick of this." He gestured wildly to Izuku. "Of you sneaking out, thinking I don't notice. Of you constantly being tired but assuring me you're fine. Whenever I ask you, you just lie. I hate it. I'm worried. About you, God damn it." Katsuki was breathing heavily now, his chest heaving. Izuku stared at him in shock. He didn't know what to say. He can't tell him about All Might, and if he says he's training, Katsuki's gonna go with him. Still searching for words, he just stared at Katsuki, guilty. After a minute or two of them just staring at each other, Katsuki huffed and looked away. He took a moment to calm down before speaking up again. "You know what, it's whatever," he mumbled as he pinched the bridge of his nose. "You can do whatever you want. It's fine, don't tell me." Katsuki walked to the bedroom door and put his hand on the doorknob. He looked over his shoulder at Izuku before saying, "If you need me, I will be at my house." "Sorry for yelling." "Wait, Kacchan, but it was no use, Katsuki had already left. They had fought like this before, but it still hurt Izuku every time. Nevertheless, Izuku knew better than to go after him. After fights, Katsuki likes to have time to himself to calm down and think. Sighing in defeat, he walked out of his room and left a note for his mom telling her Kacchan left and he's out on a walk. Young Midoriya sure is acting strange today, Yagi Toshinori, aka All Might, thought to himself as he watched the teenager train. Midoriya seemed upset today. He was distracted, and more often than not he ran into the stacks of garbage on the beach. He sighed as Midoriya tripped on a piece of trash for what seemed like the 100th time that morning. Deciding enough was enough, he called Midoriya over. "Yes, Yagi-sensei? By the way, All Might's in his skeletal form." "Young Midoriya, I can't help but notice you're a little distracted today. What's wrong? Izuku shuffled his feet nervously and stared at the ground. He then stuttered out a response. It's and nothing, Yagi-sensei, don't you worry about me. Nonsense, my boy. Now tell your old man what's wrong. Izuku glanced at All Might's face before looking back down at the floor. I know you said no one can know, he said hesitantly, pausing for a moment before continuing. He needed to be careful with his words. While they both loved each other very much, Katsuki and Izuku were still nervous about people knowing. The only person that knew was Izuku's mom because she's awesome. But I would like to tell my boy best friend. You see, he's really worried about me. He noticed how I've been going out recently in the morning, and well, when he asked me about it, I didn't know what to say. We got into an argument this morning. Well, he was more mad at me and I didn't know what to say. He looked up at All Might, a pleading look in his eyes. Please let me tell him, I don't like worrying him. I know he won't tell anyone, just please let me tell him. All Might looked at Izuku, intending to say no, but seeing the pleading look in his eyes caused him to change his mind. He sighed in defeat before saying, Okay, but I would like to be there when you explain. Izuku immediately brightened and the kid looked like goddamn sunshine. Thank you, All Might sensei. Katsuki huffed as he mixed the ingredients in the bowl harder. He was trying not to think about what had happened this morning. It was currently 8 o'clock in the morning and Katsuki was stress baking. Scattered across the kitchen counter were various ingredients to make cookies. He had already made a dozen cupcakes and was now making cookies. He knew that there was no way he could eat them all, so he decided that later that day he would drop these off at the orphanage he volunteered for. His mother wasn't home, off on another business trip, so he had the whole house to himself. While he was glad the hag was gone, the bruises from last time have yet to heal. He couldn't help but feel lonely. Other than Izuku and Auntie Inko, he had no one. He, for obvious reasons, couldn't go to the Midoriya household, so he was left in his solitude. As he was putting the cookies in the oven, he heard a knock at the door. That's strange, he thought. Normally Izuku waits a day before approaching me after an argument. Katsuki pulled the apron he was wearing off and set it gently on the counter. He walked over to the front door and opened it. He was immediately surprised when he opened the door. Standing outside of his house was, of course, Izuku and a tall blonde skeletal-looking man. Izuku was looking everywhere but him, and the man was just smiling awkwardly. Izuku. No matter how mad he was in the morning, he couldn't stay mad. Izuku glanced up in surprise at the sound of his nickname. He stared at Katsuki for a moment before hesitantly speaking up. Kacchan, I came because I wanted you to meet someone and apologize. For earlier. I promise if you just give me a chance I'll explain everything. That is, of course, if you're fine with us coming in or are available. If not, then we can leave. Sorry for bothering you, I just am really sorry for what happened and pleased and theme. Katsuki sighed before opening the door a little wider, gesturing for them to come in. They both walked in and Katsuki closed the door after them. Izuku stood there awkwardly, and once again Katsuki sighed as he led his two guests to the couch. Izuku and the man sat on one couch, while he sat on the other directly across from them. Once everyone was situated, Katsuki looked at Izuku expectantly while gesturing to the man. Oh right, Izuku said. This is Yagi Toshinori. Yagi-sensei, this is Kacchan. The man, Yagi-sen, stuck out a hand. It's nice to meet you, young Kacchan. Izuku spluttered at that while Katsuki just let out a laugh. Toshinori looked between the two, confused. Once they had calmed down, Katsuki corrected him. Kacchan's not my name, sir. Izuku's been calling me that since we were kids. My name is Katsuki Bakugu. I would prefer it if you called me Katsuki. Toshinori looked thoroughly embarrassed at that. Well, sorry about that, young Katsuki. The spiky blonde just waved his hand dismissively in response. Kacchan, Izuku spoke up. I'm really sorry for worrying you, and if you'd give me a chance I'll explain everything. Katsuki sighed. It's okay, Izuku. I'm sorry as well, I shouldn't have gotten angry. I'm not mad at you, I'm just, he looked down at his hands searching for the right words to say. Worried. I know I'm sorry, but I promise you it's for a good reason. Go ahead, I'm listening. Well, you see, Yagi-sensei here is actually All Might. What? The next 10 minutes consisted of Izuku filling Katsuki in. By the end of it, Katsuki had his head in his hands trying to process it all. It was silent for a while before Katsuki took his head out of his hands and leaned back looking semi-relieved. Well, that's a lot better than what I thought you were doing. Izuku looked at Katsuki confused. What did you think I was doing? Katsuki's face turned red and he mumbled something incoherent. What was that? Izuku asked. I thought you were out doing something illegal. Izuku stared at him before bursting out in laughter. You thought I was doing something illegal? Shut up, Katsuki said, his face beet red at this point. This is priceless. Toshinori spoke over Izuku's laughter. Is something burning? Katsuki's eyes widened as he leaped to his feet. My cookies. He ran into the kitchen to pull the cookies out. Izuku, who stopped laughing finally, perked up at the word cookies. Cookies? He got up and ran after Katsuki, leaving behind an amused-looking Toshinori. Two things real quick. Izuku met All Might similar to the show. On the rooftop, he didn't ask if you can be a hero even if you are quirkless. Instead he legit just bombarded him with fanboy questions. All Might still dropped the bottle. The slime villain still went after Katsuki and Izuku still tried to save him. All Might didn't interact with Katsuki but approached Izuku in a similar way as the show. Izuku's quirk is basically a mix between his parents' original I know. What to call it, you guys can name it. So he can spit fire of course, except it's weaker than his dad's. His telekinesis is stronger. He basically can manipulate the fire with his quirk. He can also just use manipulation which he uses to pull Katsuki close to him. I think that's it. That night, like most nights, Katsuki couldn't sleep. His thoughts were whirling in his head, thinking of new ideas or new possibilities. His mind lights up with new possibilities, new scenarios, thoughts of new dangers, and different ways of disaster. He thinks of all the ways Izuku could get hurt, he worries over what-ifs, and most of all he tries to wrap his head around the information given to him that day. He understood that not every hero can be strong all the time. That sometimes the hero loses and the villains win. He understands more than most people of how harsh life can be, to have happiness and opportunity torn away from you. He remembers how the warmth of his dad's hugs was replaced by the boiling hot pain of his mother's brutal blows enforced by her harsh words. He remembers the pleasant feeling of being surrounded by friends replaced by the ice-cold glares and cruel words from his once friends. Some days he can't find the motivation to get up, letting his mind wander into dark places. He thinks about what it's all worth. He ponders on his existence. Everyone around him excluding Izuku told him he was useless, that he was worth nothing, that he should just kill himself. By now he doesn't need them to, it's all he thinks about. There are days where he considers ending it, looking at the pros and cons, finding there are a lot more pros than cons. And then he remembers Izuku. The brilliant sun that washed out the dark night sky. He was the sun, while Katsuki was the moon. So, he gets up. He keeps trying, he keeps pushing through. If not for himself then for Izuku, because he will not be the reason for such a brilliant star to dim. When All Might told him his story, Katsuki felt shocked and a little scared. Other than Izuku, All Might was the main inspiration for him even after he gave up on being a hero. As he listened to his story, Katsuki realized some things he never did before. All Might never let people see him when he wasn't okay. He smiled all the time to keep people's hopes up, to distract them from the lurking evil in the shadows. He kept people focused on the good parts of life. By smiling, he not only assured people everything was all right but it was a sign. A sign to all the villains that lurked in the shadows, telling them that the symbol of peace is still going. That he would not stop until justice was served. He didn't want to bring morale down by telling people about the times where the heroes lost. Katsuki shivered as he thought of the monsters lurking in the shadows. His mother is one of them. She's the monster hiding under the bed, the primary reason he hesitated and self-doubted. He knew that's what she wanted, to be in control. She would hit him, beat him until he was covered in black and blue bruises, and berate him. She wanted to make sure he never got anywhere in life. She spat insults upon insults at him, breaking him down and making sure he would never forget. Never forget that he was useless, that he's a mistake, that he should have never been born, that it was his fault his dad died. In life, she wanted to be the reason he hesitated and failed. She wanted to have the sick satisfaction of watching him fail and never amount to anything. She wanted to be the reason he ended it all. But Katsuki was stronger than that. Once upon a time, he would let that happen, but he is stronger now. He wanted to make sure she understood that she was not in control. Everything he did was in spite of her. He wanted her to watch as he became one of the greatest doctors in Japan. Every day that he rebelled and kept trying was like a "F you" to her face, and in that was satisfying. Sure, he couldn't be a hero, but what is a hero truly? Sure, the pro-heroes take the villains out and save the day. But who patches up the pro-heroes and civilians that were injured? Doctors do, yes. This is mostly inspired by the frontline workers who risk their safety in the battle against COVID-19. A hero can save a person from a villain attack, but they can't prevent them from dying because of the injuries. A hero can't save a person at all if they themselves are hurt. When Katsuki's dad died, no hero could save him. To Katsuki, the doctors that tried their hardest to save his father were his heroes. His mother also liked to try and shape him into a bad person. A person just like her. A monster. Someone who purposely inflicts pain on others and only thinks about themselves. A person who is constantly angry at the world and constantly insults people. No, he wasn't going to be that person. He acted as his father on purpose to piss her off. His parents were never in a happy marriage. His mother was verbally abusive toward his father and never loved him. For a while Katsuki thought that was normal. He thought it was normal to be shamed and berated for who you are. He thought he deserved the harsh words from his mother. But he remembers one day his dad told him otherwise. It was a good day, his mom was on a business trip, so it was just him and his dad. The house was peaceful for once, and not a war zone. Although he would never admit it to anyone, Katsuki liked his dad way more than his mom. His dad never yelled at him for no reason and was patient with him. His dad would always listen to him when he'd babble on about things that happened at daycare and smile at him while ruffling his hair when he would show him a drawing of All Might. Katsuki was sitting at the table, coloring a picture of All Might while happily swinging his legs. Looking up, Katsuki saw his dad washing the dishes in the kitchen while humming cheerfully. Katsuki stood up from his place at the table, wanting to ask his dad something. "Dad?" Katsuki called as he entered the kitchen tentatively. His All Might drawing lay forgotten on the table, his curiosity overpowering his need to finish it. Hearing his son call for him, Masaru finished drying a plate before giving his attention to Katsuki. "Yes, son?" He prompted gently. He wanted to use this time Mitsuki wasn't here to help Katsuki more than he could when she was here. He watched as his son looked down at his shoes for a moment, looking unsure, before he looked back up again. Chocolate brown eyes clashed with bright red ones as Katsuki opened his mouth. "Is it?" He paused for a moment, looking lost. "Is it normal for mom to yell at you like that? Are spouses supposed to be like that?" Katsuki's eyes welled up with tears. The kids at school say their moms don't do that. Their moms don't yell at them either unless they did something wrong. Does she? Does mom hate me? Is that why she yells at you too? Masaru felt his heart break. No. Masaru walked over to Katsuki, crouching down in front of him. "It's not your fault, you did nothing wrong," he assured Katsuki as he pulled the boy into a hug. He hesitated for a moment. What was he supposed to say? He didn't want to lie to Katsuki. But the truth would be worse. He sighed tiredly before scooping the boy into his arms. No, Katsuki spouses aren't supposed to yell at each other like that. Mothers aren't supposed to yell at their children for no reason either. Katsuki looked at his dad in bewilderment. Then why is mom like that? Masaru hesitated before making up his mind. Katsuki was a very bright child. Some would even consider him to be a prodigy. He had a greater understanding of the world than most people his age, but he was still a kid. So, Masaru decided to tell the truth, but not the whole truth. "Your mother is a different case. You see, your mom and I were in an arranged marriage. We didn't choose each other, and she gets frustrated a lot. You know how quick to anger she is, and she takes it out on us. It's not your fault, but try not to take any of it to heart." Katsuki nodded and Masaru continued. When it comes to a lover cat, they should be understanding. There should be mutual respect between you and them, as well as unconditional love. If you get in a fight, which is something every couple does, you may be mad at each other but deep down you still love each other. If they are openly mean to you and don't like you for who you are, then they aren't the one meant for you. Can A. Katsuki looked away from his dad, refusing to meet his gaze. Can a guy like another guy? Masaru looked surprised before chuckling softly. I don't see why not. Katsuki whipped his head towards his dad faster than All Might himself. Masaru looked Katsuki in the eye, smiling gently. If they are truly in love with each other, then there's nothing wrong with it. Katsuki returned his dad's smile, nodding in understanding. Now, let's bake some cookies. Katsuki felt his eyes water as he thought about his dad. He truly was the best dad you could ever have. Katsuki never fully understood what a partner was supposed to be like until he met Izuku. Despite what his dad told him, he always saw romantic relationships in a negative view until he and Izuku started dating. As more time trickled by, Katsuki gave up on sleeping. He rose from his bed and got his sketchbook out, setting it on his table. Art had always been a nice hobby for him to distract himself. Picking up a pencil, he opened up the sketchbook to a blank page. With each slide, time passed, and the more focused on the drawing he became. He didn't know what he was drawing, he just let his pencil take control as the night slipped away. By the time the sun rose, he had a completed, appealing drawing of his dad. He stared at the drawing, tears forming in his eyes. He refused to let them fall, whipping furiously at his eyes, almost knocking his glasses off his face in the process. A glance at his alarm clock alerted him that it was almost time for him to get up. He promised Izuku he'd come by the beach he was training at. He rose from his chair and went to take a shower. Once he had freshened up and redressed, he noticed he still had an hour and a half left and decided to make some food for Izuku. He made some cat-shaped rice ball and placed them into a container. He grabbed the container and his keys before heading out. When he got there, he was greeted with the sight of an exhausted Izuku laying in the sand, face first with an exasperated Toshinori. He approached the pair, who hadn't noticed his presence. He chuckled, startling Toshinori while Izuku just groaned. Kacchan, save me, he whined. Katsuki simply chuckled again before crouching down next to him. I don't know, Izuku, why should I save you? At least then I wouldn't have to worry every time you go on a new hero escapade. Izuku whined pitifully at that, raising his head a little to look at Katsuki with puppy dog eyes. Because you love me? Katsuki put a hand on his chin, stroking it lightly. I guess that works. He then helped Izuku up, who leaned on him heavily. It was a little awkward, seeing as Izuku was taller than him, but it worked out. Izuku groaned again, as Katsuki led him over to an old refrigerator laying on its side. Once Izuku was situated on it, Katsuki sat next to him, squealing in surprise as Izuku leaned heavily on him. I feel like I tried to spar against you without my quirk again, he said, his voice muffled as he buried his head in Katsuki's head. Katsuki chuckled and handed Izuku the rice ball. His face was bright red at this point. As Izuku let out a muffled cheer upon seeing the rice ball, Katsuki glanced over at Toshinori. The man was watching the two with a soft smile on his face, and Katsuki decided to offer him some as well. Yagi-san, would you like some as well? I made extras. Toshinori looked surprised and shook his head. It's quite all right, young Katsuki. Katsuki shook his head. I must insist. After all, you're looking after this reckless knucklehead. Izuku made an offended noise, his mouth full of rice ball. What? Kacchan's cooking was amazing. I gotta thank you somehow. Toshinori sighed in defeat and walked over to join them. After that break, Izuku went back to his training session, leaving Katsuki and All Might alone in silence. The silence lasted a while as they both watched Izuku clean the beach or try to. Toshinori eventually broke the silence. So you and Izuku, huh? Katsuki spluttered, turning beet red. Is it that obvious? He mumbled, trying to hide in his hoodie. Toshinori chuckled at him. Maybe just a bit. Katsuki sighed exasperatedly, shaking his head a bit. He peeked at All Might through the corner of his eyes. You're not against it? Tashinori looked at Katsuki surprised. No, heavens no. Love is love after all. Katsuki seemed to deflate in relief at that. Thank God. He looked embarrassed and continued to gaze at Izuku. Sorry, it's just not everyone is so accepting about it, which was true. In middle school some kids found out about it and school was even more hell for him. They already outcast and hated Katsuki for being quirkless, but when they found out he was gay, well, let's just say he had more bruises, not from his mom. Izuku was furious when he found out and almost went to murder the kids responsible for it. Luckily, Katsuki managed to get him to let go of it so he didn't get anything on his track record. The kids at school luckily never said anything to Izuku. They were all too amazed at his quirk to hate him. He was brought out of his thoughts by Tashinori, sending him an understanding look. It's okay, I get it. After that their conversation went more smoothly. When asked about his future career, Katsuki responded with either a general surgeon or orthopedic surgeon. This made sense to Tashinori, who remembered all the medical textbooks he saw in his house. The answer then prompted him to ask about Katsuki's quirk. I'm quirkless, he said bluntly. Tashinori paled considerably and quickly began spewing out apologies, thinking he offended the teenager. Katsuki just laughed lightly. Don't worry about it. I'm not offended or anything. Tashinori looked relieved, but that morphed into confusion. But I thought Izuku said you and him spar? Yeah, we do, Katsuki said. I may be quirkless, but I still taught myself how to fight. At Tashinori's questioning look he explained. Well, when you're quirkless people can be a bit aggressive. The kids at school teased me relentlessly about it but soon became physically violent. So I taught myself how to fight back or at least defend myself. He looked down, lost in painful memories. Tashinori noted that his red eyes looked full of pain. When he spoke again, his voice was almost inaudible. Sometimes it isn't enough, he confessed. I remember one day I was walking home by myself. Izuku was sick that day, so I was alone. 3 kids from my class jumped me and I couldn't fight back. He swallowed hard as the painful memories resurfaced. I barely made it out alive. One of them had a fire quirk and well, it wasn't fun, he chuckled humorously, a haunted look on his face. You should have seen Izuku's face when I showed up at his doorstep covered in bruises and burns. He was furious. I had to stop him from going after the kids behind it all. Tashinori looked aghast, his face pale as he searched for the right words. Did you tell any teachers or authorities? Katsuki laughed humorously again. Like the idea of someone helping him was crazy, that no one cares. They don't care, at least the teachers don't. Katsuki looked back up at Tashinori, his eyes looked tired and he seemed pained. As for the authorities, I doubt they'd listen. He looked down again and twiddled his thumbs nervously. What about your parents? The teen's eyes turned cold, almost dead. My dad died when I was 5 and my mom doesn't give a shit about me. He spat out, hands shaking as he stuffed them into his pockets. Tashinori had a sad look in his eyes. Society had failed this child in so many ways. It seemed the only person he truly trusted was Izuku. Without a second thought, he pulled the kid into a hug. For a moment Katsuki tensed up, but soon he melted into the hug. It didn't feel like Izuku's hugs, which were laced with a romantic feeling. No, this felt like a hug a parent gave a child after the kid had a nightmare. It was a nice change, not that he didn't love Izuku's hugs, but it reminded him of his dad's hugs. As he teared up, Tashinori simply pulled him closer. Looking down at the shaking child who seemed to be trying to conceal his sobs, Tashinori couldn't help but feel anger at the people who had hurt him. He rubbed the teen's back comfortingly and fought back the urge to wrap him in a blanket and hide him away from the rest of the world. Izuku seemed to notice his boyfriend's distress and jogged over to them. He sat on Katsuki's other side and joined in on the hug. Katsuki now gave up on concealing his sobs. As he cried his heart out, Tashinori decided that with all his power he would make sure Katsuki was happy. He may have only met the kid, but he already felt an overwhelming feeling of protectiveness. He met Izuku's concerned look and mouthed, "I will explain later." Izuku nodded, focusing his attention back on Katsuki. As they comforted him, Tashinori began to plan. A new chapter should be up tomorrow or maybe later tonight. I can't sleep, so I got time. Eventually, Katsuki succumbed to exhaustion, slumped against Izuku as he slept. Only then did Izuku look up at Toshinori. His bright green eyes were filled with worry as they met Toshinori's bright blue orbs. Before he could say a word, Toshinori lifted a hand up, silencing him. "Let's go somewhere more private." Izuku looked hesitant but nodded nonetheless. He stood up, Katsuki in his arms. Katsuki mumbled something before snuggling close to Izuku's chest. Izuku blushed and looked up at Toshinori as he tightened his arms around Katsuki. Surprisingly, Toshinori's gaze rested upon Katsuki. Toshinori noticed certain things he didn't notice when he first met the kid. For one, the bags of skin under his eyes, deep purple, almost black. Toshinori thought back to the tired look in his eyes, looking not only mentally exhausted but physically as well. The blonde hero wondered when the last time he had a decent night's sleep was. He knew the answer wasn't good if the bags had anything to say about it. Second off, he noticed that in every encounter he had with young Katsuki he wore long sleeves. Now, this would be normal if it wasn't for the fact that it was summer. His stomach churned painfully as he thought about why. He had a strong suspicion that if he were to look under the hoodie he'd find blotches of an array of colors. Katsuki may have only said one sentence about his home life, but it was enough to make Toshinori suspicious. Lastly, he noticed how fragile the kid looked when asleep. When he was awake, he didn't look exactly threatening but not vulnerable. He looked like he was ready for anything, always tense, only truly relaxing if Izuku was there. But now, curled up against Izuku's chest like a cat searching for warmth, Toshinori felt his heart clench. Even without Toshinori's suspicions, the kid had been through so much. Toshinori felt his blood boil at the thought of the violent acts towards the teen. People had always been unfair to quirkless people. For some reason in society, if you didn't have powers you were nothing. He composed himself quickly before he got too angry. He stomps down the anger, trying to stay calm. But he knew if his suspicions were correct, if this kid truly was being abused by his own mother, there was no way he could. Toshinori snapped out of his musing when he noticed Izuku standing there awkwardly. He realized he had been unintentionally staring at Katsuki for the past 2 minutes. "Ah, sorry my boy, I just got lost in my thoughts for a while there." "It's alright, Yagi-sensei, we can head to my place if that's alright?" Toshinori simply nodded, following after Izuku. They arrived at the Midoriya's apartment in less than 5 minutes. Katsuki was still asleep, clutching Izuku's t-shirt in his fist as he stayed snuggled against him. Izuku awkwardly fished his keys out of his pockets and proceeded to unlock the door. Once it was slightly open, he kicked it open a bit wider. He led all might in mumbling rapidly about how it was a mess and he apologizes for the mess. Toshinori assured him it was fine and instead asked, "Is your mom home?" Izuku shook his head as they entered the living area of the apartment. "No, she works today," Toshinori nodded, looking around. It was a fairly modest apartment, 2 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms. A nice living room with an equally nice kitchen. Toshinori followed Izuku to his room. He took a look around the room, feeling embarrassed by the amount of All Might merchandise. He looked towards Izuku, expecting some sort of embarrassment, TBH who wouldn't be. But it seemed Izuku was completely oblivious. He was laser-focused on getting Katsuki in bed. He gently placed him on the bed, removing his shoes and glasses. He then pulled the blanket over Katsuki's sleeping form, tucking him in gently. Izuku's hand found its way to Katsuki's hair and he gently ran his fingers through it. Katsuki, although unconscious, seemed to lean into the touch. Izuku leaned down and planted a gentle kiss on Katsuki's forehead. He gave the spiky blonde hair one last pet before moving away from the bed, watching as Katsuki curled in on himself, clutching the blanket tightly. Toshinori and Izuku walked out of the room, Izuku closing the door softly behind them. Without a word, he led Toshinori back to the living room. "Do you want some tea?" "Yes, please." 5 minutes later found Toshinori and Izuku sitting on the couch, a cup of tea nestled in their hands. Silence filled the room, neither of them attempting to break it. Eventually, Izuku sighed and spoke up. "So?" Toshinori nodded. "So?" What happened? Izuku asked with a voice filled with urgency. He looked at Toshinori with the same pleading eyes he used of Katsuki earlier that day. He was sitting at the edge of his leg bouncing nervously. He worried his bottom lip between his teeth and watched Toshinori with anxious eyes. Toshinori looked down at his cup with a contemplative look on his face. He decided to start with, "We were talking about quirks?" Izuku's eyes widened and his legs stopped bouncing. He stared at Toshinori, and just as he opened his mouth, Toshinori lifted a hand to silence him. "I know he's quirkless. I was asking him about what he wanted to do, and he told me he wanted to be a surgeon. I asked about his quirk, and he told me. Toshinori swallowed a lump in his throat. He told me about how he was treated because he was quirkless." A look of understanding replaced the worry on Izuku's face. "I asked about his parents, and well, after that he sorta broke down." Toshinori sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. "I don't blame him. I barely heard half of it, and I honestly don't know how he managed to talk about it that much before breaking down." Silence filled the room again, and the two sat tensely. Toshinori glanced at Izuku and was shocked at what he saw. Izuku was staring at the teacup intently, a slight shake in his hands. Other than his hands, he looked calm, but upon closer look, Toshinori discovered that to be untrue. His normal joy-filled eyes were brimming with anger. He took a deep breath, and the slight shake in his hands was gone. The anger in his eyes, however, was not. What did he say about his mom? Toshinori was surprised at the question but answered nonetheless. "Nothing too specific, just that she doesn't care about him. But judging by the look in your eye, there's more, isn't there?" The brunette looked down, anger leaving his eyes. "I don't know much, to be honest. I have my suspicions, but nothing solid enough to get him away from there. I've heard his mom yell before. It's never exactly pleasant. I've noticed bruises, but when I bring them up he waves me off." Toshinori sighed. "You're right, that's not enough to get him out of there. I promise you, kid, if I could I'd get him out right now. I've only known him for a little while, but he seems like a good kid. He really is the best, even without a quirk. As of right now, my mom and I are just keeping a close eye on him and any behavior that could be considered suspicious. My mom really wants to take him in. She says she's suspicious as well. For now, I guess that's all you can do. Unless he confesses or we catch his mom directly in the act, we have no evidence. Just try to keep him away from his house as much as possible." Toshinori would have to remember to drop by Tsukachi's place later. Maybe he could get his help on this. For the next 15 minutes, Toshinori and Izuku conversed lightly. Eventually, Toshinori left, leaving Izuku alone. Izuku sat on the couch, deep in thought. He had always had his suspicions about Kacchan's mom. He so desperately wanted to take Kacchan away, to hold him tight and never let go. But he knew that Kacchan would have to return eventually. At least until they can prove anything. He thought about confronting Katsuki about it but decided that it will only end in disaster. Katsuki was like a stray cat sometimes. If you let him come on his own terms, it will be a lot better for both of you. He sighed as he thought about his boyfriend's tear-stained face. His heart clenched, hoping that they would find evidence soon. For now, Izuku decided he would just try his best to keep his boyfriend happy. Katsuki awoke to someone gently shaking his shoulder. He groaned and buried himself deeper in his blankets. "Oh, come on, Kat, it's time for lunch." A familiar voice called out. Katsuki perked up like a cat at the sound of food but remained buried in the warmth of his blankets. He sighed contently, enjoying the feeling of sunlight on his face. All of a sudden his blankets were yanked away by an invisible force. He shivered at the loss of warmth. Hearing a chuckle, he cranked his eyes open to be welcomed with the blurry sight of Izuku Midoriya smiling brightly at him. He grumbled a little and Izuku giggled. He was about to go back to sleep, blankets, or not when Izuku planted a soft kiss on his cheek. Izuku then proceeded to bombard it with light kisses all over his face. "All right, I'm up," he said, reaching for his glasses. Once he secured them on his face, he looked back up at Izuku. Izuku was leaning over him, smiling like the sun itself. "Hey," was all Katsuki said, smiling at his boyfriend. "Good afternoon, Sleeping Beauty," was Izuku's way of greeting. He moved back, giving Katsuki space to sit up. Katsuki stood up, intertwining their fingers. Izuku giggled and pulled their hands up, pressing a soft kiss on Katsuki's knuckles. "What's for lunch?" Katsuki asked, only now realizing how hungry he was. Izuku began to drag him to the kitchen and talk excitedly. "Well, Mom said I could order pizza, so I just went ahead and ordered a cheese pizza. We have soda and chips as well. I was thinking that for the rest of the day we could have a Lord of the Rings marathon." He looked at Katsuki nervously, thinking he had things planned. In response, Katsuki just giggled and leaned up to kiss him. "It's perfect." The rest of the day consisted of them lounging on the couch watching movies. They sat on the couch cuddled close to each other. Katsuki's head was in Izuku's lap, as Izuku's fingers ran through his hair gently. They were halfway through the last Lord of the Rings movie when Izuku's mom came back from work. "Hey, Izuku." "Hey, Katsuki." She greeted them with a smile as she set her purse down. Katsuki and Izuku both looked up from the TV. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Auntie Inko, how are you doing?" Inko smiled at them both. "I'm doing fine, thank you for asking. I assume you're staying the night?" Katsuki nodded. "All right then, is Katsukden okay with you for dinner?" "Yeah, I can help you make it if you want." "No, it's all right, but that's sweet of you to offer." Katsuki smiled at her before putting his head back down. After the movie, the two just talked for a bit before Inko called them both for dinner. Dinner went by and soon Izuku and Katsuki found themselves back in Izuku's room. They changed separately into some pajamas and climbed into bed. Izuku's arms circled around Katsuki and held him tightly. Katsuki's arms circled Izuku's waist as he buried himself into Izuku's chest. He let out a content sigh as Izuku began to pet his hair and felt enveloped by sleep. July flew by and August had begun. Summer was coming to an end and soon students would return to school. 5th graders moved on to take the place of 6th graders. 8th graders leave middle school behind and face high school. For some students, summer seemed to go by too quickly. Others were excited, waiting for August to pass so they could reunite with friends. New beginnings and opportunities were at their fingertips, and that was enough to make them nervous. If you asked any soon-to-be 9th grader in Mizurufu, Japan, what high school they want to go to, it's most likely you'd get the same answer. Almost every 14-year-old wanted to go to a high school. It was a common occurrence as most kids wanted to become a hero. It was unlikely that they would choose any other high school. UA has the best heroes education in Japan. It's ranked as the #1 high school for heroics. So it was no mystery why so many kids wanted to attend said school. While UA is renowned for its heroics course, its general education system was just as good. UA often brags about its top-notch education system, more specifically its medical courses. There are 2 ways to get into the general education department. If you failed the practical part of the entrance exam but did well on the written portion, that gets you a spot. This is the most common way into general studies, as not many people go to UA for any other reason but to become a hero. The other way is almost forgotten, as nobody wants to be in general studies. Well, besides Katsuki, of course. After some digging, Katsuki discovered a way to get into UA without doing the practical exam. Apparently, when UA was first built, there was an option to skip the practical exams. This was so if a student wanted to go into general studies, they could do so without taking the practical. Students are given a test based on their future career choice. For example, the medical test requires a student to have a general understanding of first aid and medicine. And that's how he ended up standing in front of the gates of Izuku beside him, rambling nervously. "I swallowed his hair, but I don't know if I really received his power. I haven't been able to test it out yet either. Whatever the practical exam is, I should probably only use my original quirk. What do you think the practical exam is like? Maybe we'll go against a pro hero. I wonder what All Might's quirk will be like once I use it. Will I inflate like he does? Will I get like a bunch of muscles? What do you think the drawbacks are? I wonder if I'm gonna have a limit on it as well. Do you think?" Izuku was interrupted by Katsuki's hand covering his mouth. Don't talk about that out loud." Katsuki hissed in a hushed whisper. "Don't you remember it's supposed to be a secret?" Izuku looked at Katsuki for a moment before Katsuki felt something wet and slimy touch his palm. Katsuki quickly pulled his hand away and looked at his hand in disgust. Did you really have to do that? You would think Katsuki would be grossed out, but unfortunately, Izuku had done this quite a few times. He sighed as Izuku nodded his head, looking quite pleased with himself. Whatever karma will get him back later. Turns out he didn't have to wait long. While Izuku was rambling, he didn't notice that his shoe became untied. As he stepped forward, he tripped on the shoelace. Katsuki was about to catch his dorky boyfriend when Izuku suddenly stopped falling. He had his eyes closed and was currently hovering over the floor. Confusion flooded Katsuki before he noticed a girl their age standing next to Izuku. She had a round face, with chocolate brown hair and kind brown eyes. She set Izuku upright and sent them a bright smile. Sorry, that's my quirk. I saw you were falling and thought it'd be a bad omen if you fall no? Izuku's face went red from embarrassment. He opened his mouth, going to respond, but too bad for him, he has no social skills. He stuttered, trying to find the right words to say. Katsuki sighed, shaking his head, and responded for him. Thank you. This idiot never watches where he's going. Izuku stuck his tongue out at him and huffed, crossing his arms across his chest. Katsuki sighed once again, a soft smile on his face. The girl turned towards him and smiled brightly. No problem. I'm Ochako Uraraka, by the way. She stuck a hand out for him to shake. Katsuki stared at it for a moment, surprised at her friendliness. He hesitantly took her hand and shook it lightly. Bakugu Katsuki. He looked at Izuku expectantly. Izuku was mumbling to himself about the girls, Uraraka, Quirk. For the millionth time that day, Katsuki sighed and his gaze returned to the Uraraka. The idiot next to me is Izuku Midoriya, he rambles a lot. That seemed to snap Izuku out of it. Hey! Izuku shouted indignantly. Katsuki snorted and turned to him. By now they had stopped just outside the doors to Ue. Uraraka had wished them good luck and went ahead, so they were left alone. Izuku was playfully glaring at Katsuki while Katsuki was staring at him with a fond expression. They had a bit of a staring contest, neither backing down. After a minute, Izuku blinked and uncrossed his arms, huffing in defeat. While Katsuki gave a mini cheer, Izuku seemed to be planning something. His expression changed from a defeated look to a mischievous smile. Katsuki noticed the change and immediately became suspicious. Izuku bowed dramatically and grabbed his hand. Forgive me, Your Grace. And in one solid movement, Izuku lifted Katsuki's hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to his knuckles. Katsuki felt the blood rush to his face, and he turned away grumbling to himself. Izuku giggled softly at him before letting go of his hand. Sadly, it was time for them to part ways. Good luck. Don't break your bones while I'm gone. Good luck, I promise I won't. Taking a deep breath, Katsuki pinched the bridge of his nose. His eyes were closed as he tried to calm himself down. So let me get this straight. He opened his eyes, revealing blazing red orbs. Uraraka, who was in front of him, cowered slightly. I specifically told that dumbass not to break his bones, and instead of listening he proceeds to break said bones? Currently, he was standing outside of the classroom he had taken his exam in. While he was exiting the classroom, Uraraka had pulled him aside, informing him of his dumb boyfriend's actions. He noticed Uraraka cowering slightly and softened his gaze. It wasn't his fault, she started, looking at Katsuki ever so slightly. He was doing pretty well, but I got stuck and this giant robot was about to crush me. She hesitated slightly. He powered up, sorta? Like his legs started glowing and all of a sudden he leaped up. His arms started to glow as well, and then bim, he punched the robot and it got destroyed. But it seemed his body wasn't used to his quirk, so his legs and arm broke. Katsuki muttered under his breath and rubbed at his eyes. Good news though, this old lady came by and healed him. He's in the nurse's office because he needs to rest. Other than that he's fine. Katsuki sighed one last time, dropped his hand, and opened his eyes again. He gave the girl a grateful smile. Could you guide me to the nurse's office, please? She nodded and began to walk forward, Katsuki following after her. When he arrived just outside of the door, Uraraka confessed she had to go. Now alone, he opened the door and entered. It was a fairly small room. There was a small bed in the middle and 2 curtains on either side of it. Next to the curtains were a small desk and an empty chair. The curtain closest to the entrance was pulled back, revealing a familiar figure sitting next to the bed. Yagi-san. Toshinori looked up surprised. Young Katsuki. What brings you here? Katsuki crossed the room and plopped down in the chair next to Toshinori. He huffed and crossed his arms. Well, my dumbass boyfriend decided to break his arm and legs. I swear, I leave him alone for 2 hours and this happens. Toshinori chuckled at him. Ah, well, I'm afraid his body is not quite used to one for all yet. Unfortunately, I was unable to warn him. Will he always break his bones when he uses it? No, but it will take him a while to gain control of it. Katsuki just nods and turns his gaze to Izuku. They sat in silence for a while, before Izuku woke up. His eyes flew open, revealing dark green orbs. Katsuki straightened up quickly and waited for Izuku to adjust. Kacchan? He looked at Katsuki tiredly and the blonde felt concern overtake him. Izuku pushed himself into a sitting position. Hey! He took Izuku's hand in his own. How are you feeling? Izuku blinked and rubbed his eyes tiredly. Better but still tired. Toshinori chuckled a little. Well, that would make sense. Recovery Girl's quirk requires some of your own strength and energy to heal you. Katsuki sighed in relief. That's a relief. Katsuki's anger was back now and he tried to shove it down. He knows Izuku wanted to help people. He knows that as a hero Izuku would be at risk of hurting himself or worse. He knows the risks. He knows, goddammit. But just wished Izuku was a bit more careful. Now that I know you're okay, Katsuki took a deep breath. What the F were you thinking? Kacchan. Katsuki held a hand up, silencing Izuku. Look, I get that you want to help people and all, but could you be a little more careful about it? I almost had a heart attack when Uraraka told me what happened. Did you really have to do that? I'm sure there were many other options. She was about to get crushed. There was nothing else I could do. First of all, I highly doubt you would allow one of its potential students to die. He once again raised a hand up to silence Izuku's protests. Even so, you could have used your levitation quirk to get her out of there. Instead, you decided to try and use a newly obtained quirk. Izuku looked down in defeat. Look, Izuku, I'm fine with you wanting to help people and all, but try not to break your bones, especially when I specifically said to try not to break them. Izuku looked up and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. All right, sorry for worrying you, Katsuki sighed and smiled, shaking his head. I don't know what I'm going to do with you. After that, he and Izuku traded stories on their exams. Both were pretty confident they got in. Toshinori congratulated them both and soon they were on their way home. As they grew nearer and nearer to their homes, Katsuki noted his mother's car in the driveway. He felt his stomach drop but tried not to show Izuku he was upset. Luckily, Izuku didn't seem to notice anything different. Eventually, they split ways and Katsuki dragged his feet as he walked towards his home. If you are uncomfortable with reading descriptions of verbal and physical abuse, scroll down until you see bold writing again. She didn't wait a single moment before starting to scream at him once he closed the door. Where were you, you little sheet? She pinned him against the wall and slammed the wall with her palm. He looked down in fear and stuttered out a response. IIWs. Stop stuttering, you pathetic piece of sheet. She slapped him upside the head and that's when Katsuki knew she was in a worse mood than usual. Sorry, Katsuki internally cursed at himself for stuttering. I said stop stuttering. Katsuki felt his head being slammed against the floor. His vision went fuzzy for a moment and he whimpered at the throbbing in his head. He silently hoped that Mitsuki would leave him alone now. Unfortunately, luck was not on his side. A foot connected to his ribs and pulled back only to hit him again, twice as harder. She kept kicking repeatedly in the same spot and in his face, yelling insults at him. Once she had stopped, he weakly reached for his glasses which had fallen off his face at some point. She noticed his hand and stomped on it, digging her heel into his hand. Katsuki let out a cry and she snarled. She reached down and grabbed a hold of his collar, pulling him up. Quiet, you little sheet. She leaned in close to his face and whispered into his ear. You wouldn't want to alert the neighbors now, would you? Her tone was sickly sweet and Katsuki shook his head. Good. She threw him back to the floor and kicked him in the stomach one last time. Katsuki curled up and felt tears run down his face. No food or water for you tonight. 'Tis safe to read now. In summary, Mitsuki was insulting and beating Katsuki. Katsuki waited until he heard her bedroom door slam before moving. He uncurled himself and shakily reached for his glasses. Every movement hurt and his midsection felt like it was on fire. His hand throbbed in pain as he wiped tears off his face. Slowly and ever so carefully, he pushed himself into a sitting position, wincing in pain. He shoved the glasses on his face and stood up, his body still shaking. Taking a minute to collect himself, he took in deep breaths and tried to calm down. He dragged his body towards the bathroom, intending to clean himself up. Entering the bathroom, he flipped the light switch on and closed the door behind him, making sure to lock it. He took a look at his reflection and winced internally. He had a big black eye and blood was coming from his nose. Sighing, he cleaned himself up the best he could, pondering on how he was going to hide this from Izuku. Once he was cleaned up, he entered his bedroom and collapsed on the bed. Gently putting his glasses on the side table, he didn't even bother to change into more comfortable clothes. He simply curled up, blanket tucked around him, and let out muffled sobs. When he awoke the next day, his body was aching. He stifled a groan, having been taught that any noise of pain he makes will result in a worse punishment. Sunlight bled through the window, and Katsuki felt a light touch of warmth hit his face. Refusing to open his eyes, he pulled the blanket over his head and curled up. All was peaceful until he suddenly shot up, eyes flying opening. Mitsuki always made him get up early and clean the house. He can't slack off. Sitting up suddenly was a mistake, he realized as an explosion of pain filled his senses. Pulling his shirt up slightly, he couldn't control the pained groan that escaped his lips. He froze, waiting for Mitsuki to come and scream at him. His breath hitches as he sits in anticipation. He waits for what feels like hours, but in reality, it was only a few minutes. Nothing. No loud stomps echoing through the hallway, no yelling, no threats, no one bursting in his room. He waits a little longer, still suspicious. After a minute of sitting in silence, he releases exhales lightly. She must have left for work earlier than normal. With that thought, he continues to gently lift his shirt up so he can take in the damage. A mix of black, blue, and purple bruises covered his abdomen. A glance at his hand informed him that it had a huge purple bruise on it, but luckily nothing was broken. His head hurt quite a bit, and he felt a small ache in his back from when it was slammed against a wall. I've been through worse. Securing his glasses on his face, he rises and takes a glance at the alarm clock on his bedside table. 5:45 a.m. Not as early as he'd like, but not that late either. Stretching slightly, he yawned and grabbed a fresh pair of clothing from his dresser. He walks to the bathroom door and shuts it gently behind him. Taking one look at the mirror is enough to make him grimace. He had a black eye and his eyes were an irritated red from crying. He quickly looks away from the reflection, pondering what he was gonna tell Izuku. Taking a shower helped a little with the bruises. He stepped out of the bathroom, feeling refreshed and energized. A look at the clock told him he had been in the shower for 30 minutes. Deciding it was time to get on with the day, Katsuki snatched his phone and headphones and exited his room. Going down the stairs two at a time, he couldn't help but feel happy Mitsuki was gone. Cooking breakfast is as easy as always. He's been cooking his own meals from a very young age after all. He sits at the lonely dining table, peacefully eating breakfast. A blissful silence filled the room until bam! The front door bursts open, revealing Izuku. Good morning Kacchan. Katsuki jumped in surprise, falling out of his chair with a startled yelp. Izuku rushes over. Green fills Katsuki's vision as Izuku helps him up. Oh my god, Kacchan, are you okay? I'm sorry I didn't mean to hurt you. Izuku suddenly goes silent. For a second Katsuki is confused, but then he realizes he must have seen the black eye. What happened? Izuku's voice is full of worry. Katsuki avoids eye contact, thinking of what to say. Eventually, he meets Izuku's eyes. Green orbs stare at him, full of worry. He clears his throat awkwardly. I fell down the stairs. Izuku purses his lips tightly but doesn't say anything else. Katsuki knows he doesn't believe him, but he just hopes he drops it. Quickly, Katsuki changes the subject. How the hell did you get in here anyway? Izuku takes the hint. I have my ways. A week later and Katsuki has too many bruises to count. Mitsuki wasn't going on any business trips for a while, unfortunately. It was Monday, so luckily Mitsuki was at work. He was quietly reading through a medical textbook and taking notes when for the second time that week his front door slammed open. Kacchan. The results came. I haven't looked at it yet, I was gonna wait for you. I also kinda broke into your mailbox to get your letter as well. Sorry. Katsuki blinked, looking at Izuku in pure shock. Wait, the results came in. I thought it would take a while. Wait, did you say you broke into my mailbox? Yes, sorry Kacchan. Please don't kill him. Katsuki sighed, exasperated. You're lucky I love you. Close the door and get in here, Izuku did as he was told while babbling excitedly. Katsuki rises from where he was sitting on the couch and motions for Izuku to follow him. They arrive in his bedroom and immediately Izuku bolts to the computer. Katsuki chuckles and follows after him. He was planning on standing, but Izuku pulled him to sit on his lap. He lets out a noise of surprise but eventually accepts his fate. He adjusts his position so he's more comfortable and Izuku nuzzles his nose into Katsuki's hair. They watch Izuku's first. It turns out he got the most points in rescue and in battle. He, of course, started to cry in happiness while Katsuki congratulated him. They were both surprised that All Might was now a teacher at UA. Izuku seemed happy and Katsuki made an offhand comment on how, "You're never gonna get in trouble now, Izuku. After all, your dad is teaching your class." Which resulted in a red-faced Izuku telling him to shut up because All Might is not his dad, goddammit. After Izuku's they watch Katsuki. Principal Nizu appeared on the screen telling him he was accepted as well. It was shorter than Izuku's, so soon the screen went black. It was silent for a moment before Katsuki felt himself being lifted off the chair. We did it, Kacchan. We actually did it. Izuku spun Katsuki around while giggling in excitement. Izuku, can you please put me down before I throw up? Sorry. He puts Katsuki down gently and continues to talk excitedly. Katsuki was smiling brightly at Izuku and pulled the other teenager into a kiss. They were gonna go to their dream school. This is really shitty, oh sorry. Katsuki stared at his reflection, nervously adjusting his tie. He couldn't believe it really. After years and years of studying, of hoping, he was actually going to UDA. For the second time that morning, he pinched himself, just to make sure this was real. Yup, this is real. Oh God, there were so many things that could go wrong. What if he's bullied again? What if the courses are harder than he thought and he fails? The teachers are probably gonna hate him, they always seem to. Do you really blame them? A voice that sounded suspiciously like his mother filled his head. You're useless after all. Shaking his head vigorously, he pushed those thoughts down. Although they still lingered in the back of his mind. To distract himself, he grabbed his bag and swung it over his shoulder. He headed down the stairs 2 at a time. Speeding past the kitchen, only stopping to grab an apple, he headed towards the front door. He pulled his shoes on, grabbed his keys, and opened the door. Making sure to close the door behind him, his red orbs looked up, meeting eccentric green eyes. Were you waiting outside my door? There was a slight pause as Izuku looked at him, clearly embarrassed. I can neither confirm nor deny. Katsuki snorted. Hey, I'm your dork. Katsuki grabbed Izuku's hand, surprising the greenette. Is this a word? You know what, I don't care, it is now. Joy overcame shock, and soon he and Katsuki were walking towards the station. Izuku swung their hands with each step, humming slightly. Katsuki wasn't really one to initiate physical contact, so when he did it always made Izuku overjoyed. It wasn't that Katsuki didn't like physical contact, he just had a hard time asking for it. He was very stubborn and believed he didn't deserve love. He would shove all his emotions down, not wanting to bother his boyfriend or anyone for that matter. It frustrated Izuku, but he made it his life's mission to show the blonde he deserves love. Izuku had his suspicions that the reason why he thought like this was because of a certain blonde hair bee. Oh, Izuku so wanted to hurt her the way she hurt Katsuki. But All Might was right, they didn't have enough evidence for her to be convicted, yet. Looking over at the blonde, Izuku felt a strong surge of admiration and love. No matter what anyone said, Katsuki would always be amazing in Izuku's eyes. He may not have a quirk, but he was still strong. Without his quirk, Izuku can barely beat Katsuki in a fight. Katsuki's strength didn't end there either, he was a genius and incredibly kind. Katsuki could deny it all he wanted, but Izuku knew. He knew how hard Katsuki worked to get where he is. Despite all odds, he never listened to the people that told him he was useless, that he should just kill himself. He never listened. Through it all, he held his head high. And Izuku couldn't be prouder. Katsuki stared at the giant door, nervously running a hand through his hair. He checked his schedule one more time to make sure it was the right class. 1C, looking up at the door, confirmed that yes, this was the right class. He wished Izuku was here. Unfortunately, they had to part ways once they arrived. Taking a deep breath, he placed a hand on the doorknob. He pushed the door open and was met with complete and utter chaos. The classroom was packed, barely anyone was sitting at their desk. It was loud, too loud. It reminded him of junior high. Students acting like wild animals, running rampant, judging each other, not giving a care in the world. Part of him was disappointed. He was hoping to at least have a calm classroom. You would think that going to the #1 school in Japan would mean the students were respectful. Then again, most of these students are all inspiring to make it into the hero course. Katsuki vaguely recalled Principal Nedzu saying there was only one other student that took the same route as him. The classroom was a simple setup. Desks were set up in pairs, and there were rows and rows of desks. Most rows were surrounded by large groups of students, only a handful of them sitting. It was a fairly large classroom and could probably fit 40 students. Scanning the room for an open desk, preferably away from everyone else, he spotted an open seat away from everyone else in the middle. The bad news was someone was sitting next to the open seat, hand on their chin looking out the window. She had fiery red shoulder-length hair and large square glasses. Is that an OC? Katsuki couldn't see her face from where he was, but he could guess that her eyes were closed and she had earphones in. Katsuki felt himself grow nervous. His social skills weren't really amazing. After all, the only friend he has ever had is Izuku. He looked around to see if any pair of desks were completely empty. Nope. While no one was exactly sitting, they were hovering around the desk, a silent way of claiming it. After a minute of contemplating, he sighed in defeat and trudged towards the seat. Standing in front of the desk, he wondered if he should just sit down or ask her if he can sit there. Before he could do anything, the girl sighed deeply and yanked one earphone out. She turned to him with a bored look on her face. Are you gonna sit down or what? Her eyes were a red-orange, almost like fire. She spoke with a deadpan voice, looking at him in disinterest. If you don't mind. Katsuki mentally slapped himself for stuttering. Fiery red orbs continued to bore into his soul. Eventually, she lazily lifted a hand and waved distractedly. Whatever. With that, she put her earphone back on and turned towards the window. Katsuki plopped down in the seat and began to take his stuff out. She clearly doesn't want to talk. He thought to himself as he watched the rest of the students mess around. Wincing slightly when two students began to yell, he hoped that Izuku was doing better than he was. Izuku looked at the door looming over him confidently. He plastered a friendly smile on his face, and without a moment's hesitation opened the door. He was greeted with soft chattering, nothing too loud. There were roughly 19 other kids in the room. They all turned towards him once he opened the door, and he felt his face heat up in embarrassment. Actually, not all of them had turned to look at him, Izuku noted. A student had their head resting on the desk and seemed to be sleeping. He was sitting in the last row of desks, farthest from the door. The only thing Izuku could see was his hair. His hair was purple and incredibly messy, seeming to deny gravity itself. Shinsu. Next to him was a boy Izuku recognized as Ida Tenya, 6th place in the entrance exam. Ida turned towards the door, looking straight at him. He headed toward him and Izuku felt himself get nervous. The young one for all user remembered Ida from the entrance exam. He was a bit intimidated by him. "Good morning. I'm Tenya Ida." "I know." Izuku realized that was pretty rude, so he decided to clarify. "You placed 6th in the entrance exam. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name's Izuku Midoriya." Ida pushed his glasses up to his face. "Midoriya." His face lit up in recognition. "The pleasure's all mine. You made it first in the entrance exam. I must say I am quite impressed. You realized that there was something more to the practical exam, didn't you? You must be very perceptive." He lifted both of his hands up and pointed them towards Izuku. "And I completely misjudged you. I'll admit, as a student you're far superior to me." Before Izuku could disagree with him, a familiar voice from behind him spoke up. "Hey, I know you. You're Izuku Midoriya, right?" Izuku turned around, meeting chocolate brown eyes. It took a minute before he recognized her as Ochako Uraraka, the girl that had stopped him from falling. "That punch was really cool. Thank you for saving me." She chuckled a little and smiled. "Although your friend Bakugo was pretty mad, hee." That seemed to remind her of something. She looked around the room and then back at Izuku, confused. "Say, where is Bakugo? I thought he was going to Udare as well." He was about to respond but was interrupted by a voice. "Go somewhere else if you want to play at being friends." And with that, Izuku's first day at Udare had started. Lunch had come too fast in Izuku's opinion. So far his school day has been good, even with Aizawa-sensei threatening expulsion. He almost landed in last place because he couldn't use one for all, and his original quirk doesn't do much to help in physical tests like that. But he managed to somehow land in third to last place. Some kid, Mineta Minoru, landed in last place. Aizawa wasn't joking though, he really did expel Mineta. He, Uraraka, and Ida had become fast friends. He was planning on sitting with them and hoping Katsuki would join them. Kacchan Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart. "Hey, I made a few friends from my homeroom class. Do you want to join us for lunch?" Red Heart, 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 Red Heart. Sent at 12:30 p.m. Read at 12:31 p.m. From Kacchan Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart. "Nah, sorry Aizu. I'll probs just find somewhere quiet to sit. Don't worry about me though. I'm glad you made friends." Kacchan Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart. Come on. But I guess if that's what you want. Love you. Have a good lunch. From Kacchan Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart. Love you too. You better not break any bones. Izuku smiled down at his phone. While he was disappointed, he wasn't exactly surprised. Katsuki is always nervous when it comes to new people. Most people he has met were not very kind to him. In middle school, kids did attempt to be friends with Izuku. And Izuku always befriended them. When that happens, Katsuki doesn't like to meet them. They may be nice to Izuku, but they weren't very nice to Katsuki. Izuku only found out about it late into the friendship, because Katsuki tries to hide it. The blonde said he didn't want to make Izuku have no friends. Izuku had hugged him tightly and assured him that he didn't mind. That if they were so cruel to Katsuki, they weren't good people or friends. In Izuku's opinion, Katsuki deserved all the love and friendship he was given. Before he could continue that line of thought, a voice over his shoulder. "Who are you texting?" Izuku yelped in surprise, his phone flying out of his hands. Quickly using telekinesis, he pulled it back toward him. He huffed and gave Uraraka a playful glare. She just laughed in response. Sorry. It's just you looked really happy. Whoever you're texting must be really special. She gasped suddenly and began bouncing in her seat at the cafeteria table. Ida was seated across from them. He had his hand raised, about to lecture Uraraka on privacy, but was interrupted by the young girl. Do you have a crush? Or maybe a girlfriend? Izuku was saved from responding by Ida. Uraraka. We should not pry into our classmates' personal lives like that. Izuku stifled a laugh as Uraraka just stuck a tongue out at Ida. Maybe one day, Katsuki will join them. Laying on the rooftop, Katsuki gazed at the sky while listening to Ijur. It was peaceful up here, he decided. There were no students at all, a perfect view, and overall a calming atmosphere. Wind rustled his spiky blonde hair as he contemplated on whether a cloud was shaped like a puppy or not. He had been up there for a good 30 minutes. He didn't have to get lunch from the cafeteria as he packed his own lunch. His first day had been okay. Classes were fun, but the students were always so loud. Not many of them had any interest in what they were learning, only cared about heroes. Katsuki rolled his eyes at that. A hero isn't only strength, after all, intelligence is a big role in heroics. He hadn't made friends at all, instead opting to be silent. Well, sort of. He and the girl Kobayashi, last name Amaya, first name, developed a sort of camaraderie, sharing exasperated glances at their classmates' stupidity. Turns out she was the person Nedzu was talking about. She just so happened to also be an inspiring doctor, so they got along well enough. They had most classes together and both loved their medical class taught by Recovery Girl herself. She didn't like to talk too much and he respected that. He offered for her to join him on the rooftop, but she politely refused. So here he was sitting on the rooftop, drama by Ijur blasting in his ears. He didn't notice the sound of a door opening, nor the soft footsteps that came after it. It wasn't until he saw a figure in the corner of his eyes that he ripped his headphones off. Sitting up, he turned toward the figure, half expecting it to be Izuku. It was not Izuku. The figure had large, unruly purple hair. He was looking at Katsuki, confusion plastered on his face. There were heavy bags under his purple eyes, his frame screamed exhaustion. Oh shit, sorry. I didn't expect anyone to be up here. I can leave. Purple hair said, and hand rubbing at the back of his head as he took a step backward. He stopped once he noticed Katsuki waving him over. It's fine. I wasn't really expecting anyone to come up here either. You can stay if you want. Hesitantly, the teen sat next to him. An awkward silence filled the air as they both gazed at the clouds. Surprisingly, the purple-haired teen was the one to break the silence. Huh, that cloud really looks like a puppy. Doesn't it? So I'm not crazy. Or we're both crazy. They turned towards each other, a small smile tugging at their lips. Katsuki stuck out his hand. Bakugu Katsuki, General Studies, quirkless, and inspiring to become a doctor. The other teen looked shocked at his introduction, but soon smiled and shook Katsuki's hand. Shinso Hitoshi, Class 1A. My quirk's called brainwashing. Basically, I can take control of a person if they answer a question I ask them. I think this Shinso is the start of a wonderful friendship. The conversation flowed smoothly after that. How'd you get into the hero course? I heard you have to fight robots for it. My dad teaches here and he sent a recommendation in. If you don't mind me asking, who's your dad? Eraserhead. Katsuki turned away from the cloud he was looking at, fixing his stare on Shinso. His eyes were widened and mouth slightly agape. No way. Eraserhead. That must be so cool. He's been my favorite hero since I was little. I know, right? And for the rest of lunch, they geeked out about how cool Eraserhead is. Actually, Shinso shared some embarrassing stories about his dad as well. Classes were over, and Katsuki was waiting outside the gates of U.A for Izuku. Amaya was with him for a while before leaving, saying something about grocery shopping. He hasn't seen Shinso since lunch. He was reading a book quietly while leaning against the wall casually. He was just about to finish the third chapter of one of his favorite books, The Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, when he heard a voice call his name. Kacchan. His boyfriend was running towards him, arms waving around excitedly. Behind him was a girl Katsuki recognized as Ochako Uraraka from the entrance exam. There was also a very serious-looking boy who had straight indigo hair and thin-framed glasses. He was waving his hands in an almost robotic way, saying something incoherent. They both weren't running like Izuku, luckily. Izuku didn't wait until he was close enough to Katsuki to hug him. Instead, he used his telekinesis quirk and pulled the blonde into his arms. Katsuki let out a surprised shout. "Izuku!" Said person ignored him, continuing to hug him tightly. Eventually, Katsuki gave in and hugged back. By the time he had pulled away, round face and glasses had caught up to them. Like rapid fire, Izuku began to talk. "I missed you so much. You will not believe how crazy the heroics course is. Everyone has such cool quirks. Did you know my teacher's Eraserhead? He's even cooler in person." He took a moment to catch his breath, and before Katsuki could tell his BF to calm down, a voice spoke up. "Hey, I know you. You're Bakugo, right?" Katsuki nodded and smiled a bit. She seemed like a nice girl. Uraraka speaking seemed to remind Izuku of their presence, and he turned towards them, throwing an arm around Katsuki's shoulder while doing so. Sorry guys. This is my childhood best friend, Katsuki Bakugo. Kacchan, this is Ida Tenya, and you've already met Uraraka." Ida stuck a hand out, much to the surprise of Katsuki. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Katsuki shook the hand gently, choosing to nod in response. He was still a little cautious of him, but he'd give him a chance. They began to walk again. Apparently they were all headed in the same direction. Katsuki didn't talk very much, opting to listen to the chatter of the others instead. By some miracle, they never asked about his quirk or what he was doing at UA. Izuku did a hell of a job distracting them. Soon enough they had split ways with Ida and Uraraka and were now headed towards their neighborhood. Katsuki could already feel himself dreading returning home, and Izuku seemed to sense that dread. "Wanna stay over at my place?" Katsuki smiled at him and nodded. As soon as they entered, the smell of udon filled their nostrils. They took their shoes off and placed them to the side. Izuku threw his keys in a small bowl and called out to his mom. "Mom, I'm home and I brought Katsuki." They entered the kitchen, where Inko was. Inko turned around and smiled at them. "Good thing I made extras. Welcome back you two, how was your first day?" Katsuki just said, "Good," as he placed his backpack on the couch. Meanwhile Izuku started to go into a large explanation of all that had happened that day. Inko chuckled at her son's antics and interrupted him before he ran out of breath. "You can tell me all about it when we sit and eat lunch. For now though, do you mind helping me out a bit?" They both nodded and got to work. As Katsuki chopped some vegetables, Inko began embarrassing Izuku by telling some stories from when he was younger and Katsuki wasn't around. Inko was telling him about how Izuku would always rant about how pretty Kacchan looked, while Izuku was blushing furiously while sulking in the corner. Katsuki found himself laughing and a smile graced his lips. He couldn't help but wonder, was this what a family's supposed to feel and be like? Is this what it's like to have a normal mother? Not having to live in fear and pain, having love and support no matter what? In all honesty, it confused Katsuki. How can they just ask so carefree? Shouldn't Inko be screaming at Izuku to clean the house? All of a sudden he remembered what his dad said. Mothers aren't supposed to yell at their children for no reason. A mom should be kind, caring, patient, and most of all understanding. Maybe his mom was wrong? Katsuki shoved that thought to the back of his mind, shaking his head. That's not likely. Maybe Izuku's mom was just different. But that night Katsuki found himself unable to sleep. Even with Izuku holding him tight, he found his mind going back to that one lingering thought. Maybe his mom was wrong. Maybe he deserved to be loved. Important. I'd like to thank you all for 2K hits and over 100 kudos. For a 2K hit special, I will be doing a canned A. Any question is allowed, please don't be shy. If there aren't many questions, I will probably not do it. TBH, it's up to you guys. You know, when I first began this fanfic, I didn't really expect it to get this many hits or kudos. So thank you. Now back to the story. The next couple of days went by in a blur. Katsuki's initial excitement about you died down once he realized he knew everything they were teaching. He still did his best to pay attention, but it was so hard when they were going over things he already knew. Like seriously, how did these students not know what subcutaneous was? He and Amaya had become sort of rivals. They weren't unkind to each other but very competitive. She still refused to join him on the rooftop, but that was fine. Speaking of the rooftop, Shinso now joins him every day. They've become fast friends and had many things in common. Shinso didn't treat him differently because he was quirkless, and Katsuki didn't treat him like a villain. Izuku had made friends with most of the class apparently. The other day he had been rambling about his battle training that day. Izuku was paired up with Uraraka, and together they managed to take out Ida and Shinso. The rest of the class was impressed by Izuku's skill and they approached him after class. The only people he had not befriended were some guy named Shudo Todoroki and Shinso. Both of them preferred to stick in the background. Well, at least that's what Katsuki was told. Katsuki was just happy that Izuku had friends. He was also happy that he and Shinso were friends. Despite what people may think, he was a very nice guy and they both had the same sense of humor. Dark, dry, and sarcastic. Currently, he and Shinso were sitting on the rooftop as usual. Shinso was telling him about his training that day when all of a sudden alarms blared. Level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate in an orderly fashion. Level 3 security breach? That means someone managed to get past the U-data barrier. Katsuki stood up quickly, grabbing Shinso and pulling him up with him. Shinso looked confused. What's a level 3 security breach? It means someone managed to get past U-A's security system. Come on, we gotta go. He ran towards the roof's exit, dragging Shinso with him. Eventually, they made it to the hallway. It was completely packed as students panicked and began shouting. People were roughly pushing each other and some were being trampled on. Katsuki secured his grip on Shinso, making sure he was still there. His heart pounded and his mind flew through different possibilities and scenarios. Oh God, how did someone manage to actually get past U-A's security system? For 5 minutes, it was like that. Students panicking and screaming. That was until Izuku's friend, Ida, let everyone know that it was just the press. People began to calm down and slowly dispersed from the hallway. Soon it was just Katsuki, Izuku, Ida, Uraraka, Shinso, and some other kids Katsuki didn't recognize. He let go of Shinso and looked over at the group of students. They were all circled around something or someone. Katsuki's eyes widened as he realized they were surrounding a prone form. He walked over to them and pushed past the circle of students. Laying on the ground was a male student. They appeared to be unconscious and a stream of blood was coming from their cranium skull. His arm was twisted at an odd angle and Katsuki felt a surge of urgency take over him. He got down on his knees and flipped the student over in a recovery position gently. He checked their pulse. It was slow but nothing too worrying. He turned towards the students. Can I borrow one of your jackets? And one of you should go get Recovery Girl. One of the students quickly runs off and another silently hands him a jacket. Thank you. He turned back to the student. Katsuki used the jacket to compress the head wound. While he did that, he took a look at the arm. A clean break it seems. He was brought out of focus by one of the students speaking up. Shouldn't we move him? Like, take him to Recovery Girl? Katsuki looked up and spoke, his tone calm as he tried to keep the students from panicking. The student lying on the ground was proof that panicking helped nothing. No, it's dangerous. We don't want to accidentally jostle the arm and cause more damage. The girl who spoke nodded and it was silent again. The blonde teen bit his lip lightly as he noticed the head was still bleeding. He felt himself begin to get nervous as he waited for Recovery Girl. Through the corner of his eye, he glanced at Izuku. In return, the green-haired teen caught his eye and smiled reassuringly. Katsuki began to feel himself relax when he heard footsteps approaching. Recovery Girl soon appeared beside him, and she gave him a small nod of approval. Status: damage to the cranium, more specifically the parietal bone. Clean break in the arm, possible damage to the brachial artery. Potential distal radius fracture. Recovery Girl nods, unsurprised at his knowledge. Ever since the first day of school, she knew this kid was special. He had an extensive amount of knowledge, especially when it comes to the medical department. She had been meaning to talk to Nizu about putting in a class more challenging. This just gave her more reason too. You did good, now let's get him onto the stretcher. I can help. My quirk can make him float, so it'll be easier to get him on the stretcher. Uraraka piped up. So with her help, the student was carefully moved to the stretcher and soon he was off the nurse's office. The other students thanked Katsuki and left. Now it was just Ida, Uraraka, Katsuki, Izuku, and Shinso. Silence filled the hallway, as everyone except Izuku stared at Katsuki in shock. Izuku was staring at Katsuki with pride. What? Katsuki was confused. Why were they all staring at him like that? He did what anybody would do. It's really not that impressive. Uraraka was the first one to snap out of it. That was so cool. How do you know all that stuff? Shinso spoke after her. I knew you were aiming to become a doctor, but you know your stuff. Feeling his face flush, he just chuckled awkwardly and rubbed the back of his head. Again, he really didn't know what the big deal was. Any medical student would know all that. Plus, he didn't really do anything. In his opinion, he was actually pretty useless. Before he could say any of that, he felt the familiar pull of Izuku's quirk. And sure enough, soon he was pressed against the teen's chest. Izuku wrapped his arms around Katsuki. Somehow Izuku always knew when his thoughts turned negative. So he spared Katsuki from answering by answering for him. He's amazing. He knows what to do in crises like this. He knows more than some of the medical students at college. Izuku bragged as Katsuki turned beet red and tried to hide his face. It's not that cool or impressive. I'm sure anyone who is remotely interested in the medical field would know all that. He continued to bury his head in his hand, wishing he was anywhere but there. He wasn't used to being complimented. The middle school students would pick on him and his mom told him he was wasting his time. The only person he could think of that complimented him on it was Izuku and Auntie Inko. But he thought that's just what people do sometimes. That because they love you they just say things like that. Ida looked at him and pushed his glasses up. I disagree. The medical course is a very honorable course. It is very impressive for you to know all that at the age of 16. This just caused Katsuki to blush more and dig his head in his hand. Izuku pulled away but kept his hands on his shoulders. Come on, Kacchan, don't hide from us. He lifted his own hands up and gently pried Katsuki's hands away from his face, revealing a very red Katsuki. The blonde looked down, still trying to hide. Izuku put a finger under his chin and tilted it up. I want to see your face. Katsuki blushed more, if that was even possible. Looking into Izuku's eyes, he found endless amounts of love and admiration. He felt his heart flutter, and part of him was thinking maybe Izuku was right. He always told Katsuki he should be proud of his knowledge. To shove it into the face of those bullies, who in Izuku's words, were dumber than a doorknob. He smiled at Izuku, allowing pride to swell in his chest. And without thinking, Katsuki pulled Izuku into a kiss. It was a short and sweet kiss and they seemed to forget about the other people in the hallway. That was until Ida cleared his throat awkwardly. They quickly pulled away from each other. Katsuki hid slightly behind Izuku, nervously playing with the hem of his shirt. And unconsciously Izuku placed himself in front of Katsuki, ready to protect him. While Katsuki avoided eye contact, Izuku stared at them daringly, fierce protectiveness in his eyes. Both of them were expecting endless amounts of hate comments and insults and began mentally bracing themselves. What they got in response was something completely different. I knew it. They looked up in surprise and were greeted by Uraraka's beaming smile. She threw a fist in the air and let out a small cheer. I told you they were already dating Ida. You owe me 10 yen now. She turned towards the shocked couple. You guys are so cute together. I'm so happy for you. Katsuki was too shocked to answer, so Izuku did it for him. Thank you. Sorry for our reaction. People normally react very negatively when they find out about our relationship. Katsuki shivered, remembering all the horrid insults, all the lockers he was shoved into, and all the punches that were thrown. Izuku seemed to be thinking the same thing and unconsciously pulled Katsuki towards him. When Katsuki snapped out of his thoughts, he turned towards Shinso. I hope this won't affect our friendship. The purple-haired teen just blinked at him before cracking a grin. I hope it wouldn't, after all, I'm gay as hell. Katsuki felt relief fill him as he sent a grin back. Izuku seemed to finally process the words said and glanced between them, confused. Since when did you guys become friends? Katsuki immediately felt guilty. It's not like he didn't mean to tell Izuku. He just didn't give any specifics. All he said was he made a friend. Oops. He's the friend talked about. Izuku mouthed, oh, and smiled. I'm glad you made a good friend. He stuck a hand out to Shinso. Well, we may already know each other from the hero course, but I think I should formally introduce myself. My name's Izuku Midoriya, Kacchan's childhood friend turned boyfriend. If you hurt him, I will kill you. The insomniac chuckled nervously, slightly unnerved by Izuku's intense look. Soon the bell rang signaling for students to return to class. Katsuki spilt ways from the 4 Class 1A students and began making his way to homeroom. Katsuki was sitting in the principal's office nervously. Earlier, just as class was about to end, he was called to the principal's office and he had no clue why. His thoughts began to wander as he desperately tried to figure out why he was here. He was sitting on a couch across Principal Nizu. He just stared at the teacup in his hand, waiting for anything to be said. After taking a long sip of his tea, the hybrid animal spoke. I will say, I was quite impressed by your exam results. Finally, Katsuki tore his gaze away from the teacup. He looked up at Principal Nizu, clear shock in his eyes. After a moment of staring, he realized he was being quite rude and decided to respond. I'm sorry, but why am I here exactly? I don't think I've done anything wrong, have I? Principal Nizu calmly took a sip of tea, contrasting Katsuki, whose hands were shaking in anticipation. Quite the contrary, actually. You see, Recovery Girl was quite impressed with you. Nizu met Katsuki's gaze. We've been keeping an eye on you for a while now, Katsuki Bakugu. You were one of 2 students this year that avoided the hero course. It's been decades since something like this has happened. Most teens these days only come to you for the heroics course. So I must ask, why not heroics? The blonde teen blinked, certainly not expecting that question. He was hesitant for a moment, contemplating what to say. In the end, he just decided to tell the truth. I'm quirkless. But if I'm, to be honest, that's not the real reason. Nizu lifted an eyebrow. Oh. Looking back at his teacup, Katsuki nodded. Yeah. For a while, I still trained to become a hero even after I was told that I was quirkless. But eventually, I decided I wanted to become a doctor. You see, when I was 5, my dad died. He felt his throat close and cleared his throat awkwardly. Even after all 11 years, it's still difficult to talk about. He was driving me to my favorite restaurant because it was my birthday. Some villain had a quirk that allowed him to manipulate the road, kinda like Cementos. Our car flipped over and my dad got hurt severely. The hero had defeated the villain and gotten us out, but he couldn't help my dad. That's when I realized, a hero may save the day, but there are things they can't handle. By the time the paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. After that day, I dedicated my time to reading medical textbooks and learning first aid. Silence filled the room as Katsuki nervously fidgeted in his seat. I suspected as much. Katsuki continued to stare down at the teacup. The human mind is very interesting. One day it can be set on a certain goal, but the next day it can be changed. He took a sip of tea. I have a proposition for you. Just outside Nizu's office, a single person stood in. The shadows. They hummed thoughtfully, mulling over what they had just overheard. Their boss would want to hear about this. They began walking, and just before they entered the main lobby, their eyes glowed. Everything around them froze, and they walked into the lobby. Everyone in there was frozen. It seemed like time itself had stopped. They exited the building and continued to walk. Cars were frozen in the streets as the person danced around them. Birds that were once flying remained in one place, wings spread open. It wasn't until the person had reached an alleyway that everything began to move again. The mysterious figure pulled a flip phone out of their pocket. Dialing a number, they put the phone up to their ear. After a moment or so, someone picked up. I presume you have some useful information for us, Dr. Zeit. Is the boss there? He's gonna wanna hear this. Speak, Dr. Zeit, you know I don't like my time being wasted. A new voice joined in. I think I just found our new recruit. It had been 2 days since the press incident. Izuku was sitting in class, listening intently while jotting down notes. Currently, Aizawa-sensei was going over their performances in battle training. Izuku himself had done pretty well, and right now he was taking notes on Mina's quirk. Eventually, he let his mind stray and stopped taking notes. If someone had told Izuku when he was little that he'd get into Yude, he wouldn't believe you. As a kid, Izuku didn't believe he would ever accomplish something that big. His quirk came in late and so he and Katsuki were bullied extensively. Even after he gained a quirk, he was still picked on. It wasn't as bad, because a lot of the kids were scared of him. They just insulted him a lot because he hung out with Katsuki. Because of this, he still suffers from minor self-esteem issues and occasional bouts of social anxiety. For a while, he was in a bad place. He felt like he was alone in a void, forever falling. Inky blacks surround him and he desperately tried to break the surface. To find something or anyone other than his own thoughts. He felt so alone he felt useless. Even with a quirk, something just always felt off. Classmates would fawn over his powers but were somewhat reluctant to hang out with him. He was drowning with no way out. And then there was Katsuki. His lifeboat, his light, his savior, and his best friend. Through everything, the bad and the good, he was there. Katsuki was Izuku's main inspiration, even past All Might. Despite everything the universe threw at him, the blonde always stood tall. They were each other's support systems. They loved each other very much and it frustrated him to watch Katsuki suffer. He was very protective of the blonde and even though the other was reluctant to admit it, Katsuki was protective of Izuku. Izuku silently giggled to himself as he remembered when a kid insulted him in front of Katsuki. They were in middle school and most of the school found out they were gay and in a relationship together. Yeah, you can imagine how that went. A kid had called Izuku a certain slur that no one should ever repeat and said he can't become a hero if he's gay. Katsuki literally blew up at the kid. It was one of the only times Izuku's seen the blonde mad. Izuku brought his attention back to Aizawa-sensei. He had finished reviewing and was now waiting for their complete attention. He stared at them all through half-lidded eyes and with a tired, almost bored, tone he said, "Today's training will be a little different. You'll have 3 instructors, me, All Might, and another faculty member will be keeping tabs on you. You'll be doing rescue training. What you wear in this exercise is up to you. I know you guys are all excited about costumes, but keep in mind you haven't gotten used to them yet so they may limit your abilities. This special training's at an off-campus facility, so we'll be taking a bus to get there. Additionally, we will be having a special guest join us. He'll be here in case of medical emergencies." The door opened and to Izuku's surprise, Katsuki walked in. The rest of the class observed the teenager in front of them. He was fairly short, around 5 feet 60 centimeters. He had ash-blonde spiky hair that made him look like a Pomeranian. Crimson-red eyes his behind thin-framed glasses, as the blonde observed the classroom. In his left hand, the teen was carrying a big red bag that had the words, "First Aid," printed on it. Using his right hand, the mystery student pushed his glasses up. Aizawa moved from his position behind the stand to the door. He placed a hand on the doorknob. Just before he left he said, "Go ahead and introduce yourself. After introductions are over, everyone gets in their hero suits and meet outside." With that, the tired pro-hero opened the door and left. The blonde noticed them all staring at him and chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of his head in an anxious manner. Before anything was said, a certain broccoli-haired boy stood up from his seat excitedly. "Kacchan, I didn't know you were gonna be here." Most of the class looked at Izuku, confused. How did he know this kid? Sorry, Izuku, I decided to keep it a surprise. Turning towards the rest of the class, Katsuki couldn't help but gulp nervously. "And my name is Katsuki Bakugo. I'll be joining you from most of your hero exercises. I'm here to make sure that any injuries sustained are taken care of. Of course, you'll still need to go to Recovery Girl after class." Once he was finished, everyone began asking questions all at once. The once quiet classroom was now filled with noise. Questions were being thrown around left and right and it was utter chaos. Ida and Izuku were trying to control the situation but were failing. Katsuki cowered slightly at the noise and felt himself start to panic. He was at a loss at what to do when a voice shouted out through the class. "Guys, shut up. You're scaring the shit out of him." All heads turned towards the owner of the voice. Shinso had his head raised from his arms as he gave the class a bored look. Everyone was in complete shock, and eventually, Katsuki cleared his throat to gain everyone's attention. "Thank you, Shinso." The purple-haired teen nodded at him before placing his head back on the desk. "Please raise your hand if you have any questions." Almost all hands shot up. Katsuki felt himself becoming nervous again, not expecting this many questions. He was playing with his hands when he felt a familiar presence appear beside him. He looked at Izuku, who nodded at him with an encouraging smile on his face. Feeling braver, Katsuki gestured for a girl who looked a lot like a frog to ask away. "No offense, Karo, but wouldn't it be better for someone who is professionally medically trained to take care of our injuries?" Several hands went down at the question. "Huh, seems like most of them have similar questions." "No offense taken," Katsuki said, a small nervous smile plastered on his face. "I understand your concern. I assure you I am qualified for this. Principal Nizu wouldn't let me be here if that was the case." She nodded and Katsuki called on another girl to speak up. Based on the descriptions he was given by Izuku, he recognized her as Yayorozu Momo. "I understand you said most of our hero exercises. Are there going to be certain days you are not here?" Katsuki smiled at her. "Good question. I will be here on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. On Tuesday and Thursday, I will be personally assisting Recover Girl." A few more hands shot up and some were dropped. He called on Ida this time. "If you don't mind me asking, are you a general studies student?" Katsuki nodded. "How are you here then? Surely you must have classes right now." More than half of the raised hands dropped down. "Oh, well, this is technically my class." His sentence was met with even more confusion, so he decided to elaborate. "You see, when you apply for U.A, you can specifically apply for general studies. Just like the support and management system. Not many students chose this course because mostly everyone wants to be a hero. Anyway, when you apply you can pick a specific course that matches your career choice. I chose the medical course. I was originally taking an introductory class to medicine and anatomy, but I was eventually pulled out because I already knew all that. Nizu had me take a test, making sure I was qualified before placing me here." He called on the last hand, which belonged to a pink-skinned girl. Katsuki vaguely recalled her name was Mina Ishido. "How do you know Midoriya?" Said person and Katsuki glanced at each other. The rest of the class had perked up, seemingly interested in the question. Even Todoroki perked up a little bit. "We're childhood friends." They seemed to accept that answer and soon everyone started to leave to get ready. Katsuki sat between Izuku and Shinso as they rode towards Yi. He had his headphones on and was just quietly sitting there, lost in his own thoughts. He was tempted to put his head on Izuku's shoulder and just fall asleep. He hasn't been sleeping lately and Mitsuki was being crueler than usual. He suspected it had something to do with getting into U.A instead of going to that fashion school. Putting reason aside, she had definitely been harsher. He winced slightly, hot pain making itself known as he moved slightly. His back, abdomen, and chest were aching from last night. He pushed the pain and memories down, knowing if he didn't he would cry. He closed his eyes as he listened to Robin Skinner sing. 5 minutes later, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Opening his eyes, he was met with Izuku's eccentric green eyes. The other teen had a soft smile on his face, watching him take his headphones off. Cutting off the melody of Home by Cavetown, "Check him out," he lifted a questioning eyebrow. "I mean Tsuans to ask you a question." The less angry Pomeranian sighed and leaned forward, turning his head towards the frog-like girl. He plastered on his best smile, hoping she wouldn't notice it was fake. It's not like he didn't like her, he was just not in a mood to talk to anyone. Izuku was an exception. "What's your quirk?" "Midoriya won't tell us." "Of course." Of course, she would ask the one question that would make this day worse. Oh God, they're gonna hate him now. The rest of the class inconspicuously not really leaned in, as they were all interested in the answer. Katsuki felt himself begin to sweat as he tried to respond. IIIWWL, I curse this DMN stutter. He kept trying to stutter out a response. Slowly, he began to shrink back behind Izuku. His boyfriend put an arm around his shoulders for comfort. He kept trying to respond when a tired voice spoke beside him. He's quirkless. Katsuki blinked and looked beside him. Shinso was staring at the rest of the class with a weird glint in his eyes. He looked almost angry that they brought the question up. Katsuki muttered a small thanks and closed his eyes, bracing for impact. He waited and felt Izuku's arm tighten around him. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Izuku. The green-haired teen was staring at the rest of the class, a fierce protectiveness in his eyes. If any of you have a problem with that, he growled out, I would seriously reconsider your career choice. All was quiet and no one dared to break it. Except for one person. You shouldn't be here. Katsuki looked up in shock, meeting mismatched eyes. Todoroki, please don't hate me or him. He was just taught wrong, said it almost matter-of-factly. Everyone stared at him in shock. Quirkless people are useless. You're only a liability, especially in class training upcoming heroes. Katsuki shut his eyes tightly, curling in himself slightly. Years of painful memories resurfaced to the front of his mind. He curled up more, wanting to just disappear. His thoughts were whirling, overwhelming him. He felt like he was drowning as his thoughts began to consume him. Useless. 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 And then a voice brought him out of his thoughts. You don't know what the F you're talking about. Izuku spat out, anger burning in his eyes. Kacchan isn't a liability and he sure as hell isn't useless. He could sure as hell kick your butt in a one-on-one fight without quirks. You may have a powerful quirk, but quirks aren't everything. He tightened his grip on Katsuki. If this wasn't a heroics course, you would be dead the minute you said that. Lucky for you, I want to be a hero. He looked around at the rest of the class. If any of you agree with him, consider our friendship over. Beside Katsuki, Shinso was glaring profusely at Todoroki, an equal amount of protectiveness in his eyes. Todoroki looked shocked before his face turned neutral. I was just stating a fact. Without a quirk, a person is useless. Shinso shot up from his seat, ready to absolutely destroy Todoroki. He was stopped by a quiet voice beside him. Don't. I'm used to. Katsuki wasn't looking at him while he said it. Instead, he had his face buried in his knees. Shinso looked hesitant, but eventually sat back down, still glaring at Todoroki. Silence filled the bus, as Izuku whispered soft words of comfort to him. The blonde eventually allowed himself to drift off, head on Izuku's shoulder. Izuku looked down at the sleeping blonde, a feeling of hopelessness tugging at his chest. He wished he could protect the blonde. He wished he could stop the bad thoughts. Stop the endless amount of insults people threw at the blonde. Stop the abuse he knew Katsuki was going through at home. But Izuku knew no matter how many people he fought or threatened to stop bullying Katsuki, there would always be hate. He tightened his grip on the blonde and looked up. His eyes were surprisingly emotionless as he surveyed the classroom. Most looked shocked over what had just happened but unsure of what to say. Some were staring at Katsuki with pity and sadness. He eventually met mismatched eyes. I don't know who the hell taught you that, he began in an icy cold tone. Frankly, I don't care. I just want to make this clear. His eyes were blazing now. Hurt him and I'll hurt you. I don't give if, whether it's verbally or physically, hurt him and you'll be hurt twice as harder. He growled out, his tone was eerily calm. Sure, Izuku knew that he couldn't threaten everyone that dared to even look at Katsuki the wrong way. But he'll sure as hell try. Don't worry, Todoroki gets better eventually. Also, remember to leave questions in the comments. Small gift. Art by me, it's really bad. Q&A will take place next chapter. This is your last chance to submit questions. Dr. Zeit sipped her tea slowly. She watched the man in front of her carefully. Even after years of working under him, she was still cautious. He was, after all, the most dangerous man in Japan. All for one sat across from her, leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together as he watched her intently. It was the day after she had initially called about Bakugo Katsuki. She had spent the night digging into anything she could find about the kid. She was fairly confident they would be able to recruit him. She placed the cup of tea down on the saucer with a clang. She was about to speak, but All for One held a hand up. "It seems we have some eavesdroppers." Without moving an inch, he opened the door. It flung open and two young teenagers fell into the room. The smaller of the two looked about 15 years old. He had light blue unkempt hair and red eyes. His hands were covered with gloves and he was wearing bagging sweat breathes with a black shirt. The other one looked to be 16, or he had spiky jet black hair and some of his skin was purple and seemed to be stapled on. He wore a black leather jacket with a white t-shirt and black skinny jeans. The older of the two quickly got off his younger companion and helped him up. Pulling the blue-haired teen closer to him, they both glared at All for One. The air around the two, and only them, became dense as their hands clawed at their necks. Now, All for One said, not even moving a muscle. "What did I say about eavesdropping, you two?" He released them and the two greedily filled their lungs up with air. All for One spoke again, and his aura was enough to paralyze someone in fear. "We will speak about this later. You know what happens when you disobey my orders, Tamura Shigaraki?" The blue-haired kid snarled at him. "My name's not Tamura Shigaraki, you sick F-." He looked ready to run up and attack All for One, but his companion held him back. All for One sighed deeply and spoke again, his tone eerily calm. "You will learn to accept the name one day. Now, don't you two have a mission to prepare for? Don't even think about disobeying orders again, you know what will happen." His tone changed at the last part, almost as if he were implying something different from the last time he said it. The kid, Shigaraki, at least according to All for One, froze. Horror replaced anger as his body went rigid. He eventually slumped in defeat and he and his companion left the room. The door closed and Dr. Zeit felt a million questions arise in her head. "I apologize for my apprentice's rudeness." She turned towards the man in front of her. She wanted to question him but knew better than to voice her opinions. "He's just having some trouble fitting in a way." Fitting in is one way to put it, she thought sarcastically. "Now please explain to me who exactly has caught your interest." Putting her questions aside, she slid a manila folder across the desk towards All for One. "Bakugo Katsuki. Age 16, aiming to become a doctor. He goes to UD at A in the General Studies course." She began, her voice slightly altered by the fox mask covering her face. "Quirkless and deemed useless by society." All for One hummed thoughtfully. "And why should we be so interested in him?" "He is in a romantic relationship with All Might's successor, Izuku Midoriya. Not only that, but he has formed a parental relationship with All Might himself. Turning him on our side would do a great deal of damage." All for One placed to file down. "How per se do we do that?" She leaned in a little and placed a finger on the paper, pointing towards the parent section of his file. His father died when he was young due to a villain attack. The hero on the scene that day may have been able to capture the villain but failed to save his father. This event led to everlasting trauma and PTSD. I followed him home yesterday and based on what I heard, his relationship with his mother isn't very loving. He has no siblings, so overall family won't be a problem. He has no connections except for All Might, Midoriya, and Midoriya's mother. He was bullied relentlessly by all his classmates and adults never treated him kindly. He has lost all hope in society. All he needs is someone to guide him into villainy. As for training, he is self-taught and is very advanced in fighting techniques. In conclusion, if we use his trauma and PTSD to our advantage, convincing him to join you will be easy. His turning will cause the symbol of peace and his successor a great amount of turmoil. You seem quite invested in this." She smirked behind her mask. "The brat's got devotion, he's very advanced in the medical field. I would like to teach him a thing or two. Besides," she said, her tone had gone from amused to icy. "I don't condone child abuse." The sentence had two meanings to it. She stared at All for One, knowing he understood what she was implying. The man just chuckled darkly. "Watch your tone there, Dr. Zeit. After all, you owe me." So Tenko and Dabi have been introduced. If you have any questions about the timeline or anything really, feel free to leave it in the comments. I will answer them in the candid. I hope you enjoyed. This is my favorite chapter so far personally. Okay, so before we get started I thought I'd explain the timeline a bit. Shigaraki is 15 and Dabi is 16. In this EU, Dabi is Tuya Todoroki. He and Shoto are only 1 year apart. He ran away after his father burned his skin and sheet. He didn't necessarily want to be a villain and all for one took him in. As for Shigaraki, he was taken away from his family at the age of he lived with his father, who was an abusive a-hole, and sister. I don't think there is much else I can explain without spoiling the story, so hope that's enough. Where did Katsuki get the name Deku in this universe? Because normally he got it to bully him. Great question. So in this universe, as I mentioned, Deku was also bullied. Izuku was a late bloomer when it came to quirks, so he and Katsuki were both teased. Now in the anime/manga, everyone was impressed with Katsuki because he was smart and had a powerful quirk. One day at the playground, Katsuki mentions that Deku means useless and says that Izuku should be called Deku. In this universe, it happens very similarly. Katsuki was sitting next to Izuku, showing him new words he learned. He mentioned that means useless and some other kids overheard and started calling Izuku. Izuku would get very upset at this. So to cheer him up, Katsuki told him that Deku also sounds similar to the you can do it. Even after he got his quirk, kids may have not called him Deku, but he still kept the nickname because he thought of it positively. Does Shinso have a bad household too? Shinso originally had a bad household, but was later adopted by Aizawa and Yamada. At the age of 9, Shinso got kicked out of his house for the night. It was a somewhat common occurrence for him, so he hadn't thought much of it. Aizawa was on patrol and saw him, covered in dirt and bruises. Shinso recognized Aizawa as Eraserhead, so he agreed to go with him. So Aizawa takes him home to Yamada and they clean him up and feed him. He stayed there for the night and in the morning Aizawa asked him what happened. Shinso hadn't spoken at all, not knowing he was allowed to. He told Aizawa, thinking it was normal. Aizawa and Yamada were angry at his dad and they took Shinso in. Where did this idea come from? Well, I would always see a bunch of stories about Izuku never getting one for all and becoming a doctor or a policeman. Katsuki is my third favorite character, so I was like, what would it be like if he was quirkless? So I read a couple stories and I decided to write this one. I changed his personality cause I am a huge nerd when it comes to psychology and stuff and wondered if certain events change, how would his personality be affected? So I started to toy around with ideas and possibilities. And bada bing bada boom, you got this hunk of junk. How did you prepare before posting the story? Well, I have a notebook for ideas that I normally write in. I like to rewatch the anime and write down the differences that would occur without Katsuki. I have most of the story plotted out in my head, so normally I just have to write them. I write all chapters on a Google Doc and then edit them. When did you start watching/reading BNHA? I started watching it and it was actually my first anime. My brother had recommended it to me, so I started watching it. I fell in love with it and then proceeded to watch a bunch of other animes. I started reading the manga a couple of months later. Fun fact, BNHA is not my favorite anime, although I do love it. My favorite anime is a 13-episode long anime called Black Bullet, although the ending wasn't very good. What gave you the idea to have Bakugo not only be quirkless but also aspire to be a doctor? I mainly just started to play around with Bakugo's character. I was heavily inspired by lessons learned by Sif. It's a great FIC and the author really digs deep into Bakugo's character. After that I started to mess around with the chain and events in Bakugo's life that we know of. I also couldn't find any fics with nice, short, and glasses Bakugo. What do you identify as? Female, male, non-binary, or none of those? You don't have to answer if it's uncomfortable. 8. What inspired you to write this story? Just out of curiosity? Was it personal or just a spur-of-the-moment thing that breathed life into itself? As I said, I was heavily inspired by other fics of Bakugo. I've also really enjoyed writing and thought this would be good writing practice. I would definitely call this a spur-in-the-moment thing. Even though I was inspired by something, it didn't mean I was actually gonna write it. But before you knew it, I had posted the first chapter. Other than the obvious, why would the League of Villains, if that's who it is, be interested in Kacchan? In the anime/manga, I believe they were interested because of his aggressive personality and powerful quirk. Maybe this time it's just because he is an outcast to the norm? I explained this in the last chapter, so I'll be brief. They are mainly interested in him because of his relationship with Izuku. His lack of quirk would not be a problem because All for One could just give him one. My OC is not just called Dr. Zeit cause it's cool, she is literally a doctor. And in German I think Zeit means time. My OC's quirk is pretty much just time manipulation, so I thought it would fit. Anyway, she has vast knowledge in regards to mental health. She uses things like depression, PTSD, and trauma to gain more League members. So she plans on using these things against Katsuki and manipulating him into joining the League. 10. Silly question, but here we go. In the anime/manga, I think Kacchan is taller than Izuku. Is that the same here, or are they somewhat the same height? In the manga/anime, Kacchan is taller, but in this Izuku is taller. No real reason for it, I just like short Katsuki. Also I can relate to him cause I am a midget. Welp, that was the candid. Next chapter will probably be up in a couple of days. It's going to be very long, so it'll take a while for me to write it. Tires growled against the pavement as the bus driver killed the engine. Students rose to their feet, relieved that the awkward ride was over. After Izuku's final warning, the tension in the bus was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Eventually, students began conversing quietly to each other once again. The rest of Class 1A didn't necessarily agree with what Todoroki declared, but they didn't disagree completely with him either. Training can be dangerous at times, especially since they are training with their quirks. Having a quirkless person there was like a civilian at an ongoing crime scene. They're worried that they may hurt the teen and hold back because of it. A lot of their quirks are very destructive if not used properly. The heroes in training had nothing against Katsuki, quite the opposite actually. To them, Katsuki was quite a pleasant company. He may be shy and quiet, but is extremely passionate about certain topics. If you ask the right questions and push the right buttons, he can be very loud as well. Although when he does shout or becomes slightly heated about a topic, he quickly covers it over. Perplexing was a word some would use. Those are the people who paid close attention to all the little things that were usually overlooked. These students are Tsuyu, Yaoyorozu, and Shinso. Maybe it was the tired, almost haunted look in his eyes. Perhaps it was the way he seemed to curl in on himself, as if trying to hide away from them. Or the almost unnoticeable finches, or the way he seemed guarded, never truly relaxing unless around Izuku. There was also the certain look of mistrust in his eyes as he looked at them. But all factors considered, they didn't hate Katsuki. Nor did they think he or quirkless people in general were useless. In all honesty, most of them were disgusted by Todoroki's words. Despite that they didn't voice their opinion. That was their mistake. Each of them had their reasons, some just needed to build up the courage. Nevertheless, the incident was not brought up throughout the short bus ride. As students began to exit the bus, Izuku gently nudged Katsuki awake. "We're here, Kacchan," said teen. Blearily opened his eyes. He yawned and stretched his arms out like a cat. Izuku watched him amused. Once Katsuki had somewhat woken up, they both stood from their seats on the bus. Katsuki pulled a hand up to his face and rubbed at his eyes blearily. Izuku's eyes glinted in amusement. "You know, Kacchan, you really act like a cat sometimes." Katsuki let out a small hum, clearly not paying attention. He seemed to be still half asleep. Izuku took this as an indication to continue. "Maybe I should call you Katsuki." Katsuki blinked, processing the joke slowly. Izuku took this opportunity to get a head start on running. A few seconds later he heard an angry shout of "Hi!" and a pair of footsteps running after him. The rest of the class watched, amused, as Katsuki chased Izuku off the bus. Well, they at least learned one thing about Katsuki. Bad jokes seemed to really annoy him. Same though. The 20 students all looked at the landscapes around them in awe. In front of the students, Aizawa and 13 were talking in hushed whispers. Something about All Might not being able to make it. Most kids shrugged it off and continued to admire the building. Katsuki and Izuku noted that 13 held up 3 fingers, indicating that All Might used up all of his hours. Katsuki felt disappointment well up inside him. He was looking forward to seeing Toshinori. Rescue training was about to begin when a portal appeared in the center of USJ. A horde of people emerged from the purple mist. None of them particularly stood out to Katsuki. Most looked like small-time villains or thugs. He assumed it was for training, but 3 certain figures caught his attention. Katsuki couldn't really see them much from where he was standing, but they seemed to be standing side by side. One was hunched over slightly, jet black hair styled much like his own. The other was slightly shorter. The most noticeable thing about him was his light blue hair and... is that a hand on his face? There was another figure that unnerved Katsuki, except he didn't look exactly human. It seemed to be as big as All Might and as muscular as the hero as well. Katsuki felt a shiver down his spine. Something about those 3 just didn't feel right. The portal slowly closed and the purple mist transformed into a person. Izuku and his classmates were about to leap forward, thinking it was part of training when Aizawa put his hand in front of them. "Don't," he commanded, his tone sounded urgent. "Those are real villains." Confused shouts emerged from the students. "Why aren't the alarms going off? They must have jammed the security system." Eraserhead glanced at Kaminari. "Kaminari," the teen looked up, startled. "Use your quirk and try to communicate with UA." Kaminari gave a determined nod. Satisfied, Eraser now addressed 13. 13, protect the students and get them out of here to alert the pros. I'll hold them off until the pros arrive. Izuku looked up sharply, a worried look in his eyes. "But Sensei, your fighting style is not meant for these types of fights. It's meant for surprise attacks. Fighting that many villains at once would be..." Eraser interrupted him. "You can't be a hero with only one trick." He sent Shinso, who looked quite worried in his own way, and sent him a reassuring smile. With that he leaped forward and advanced towards the villains. Izuku watched in awe as he took out villain after villain, while the rest of the class began running towards the exit. Katsuki, noticing his boyfriend wasn't moving, quickly grabbed onto the back of Izuku's shirt. He dragged him as he ran, until Izuku began running as well. Katsuki was about to lecture him when the same purple mist from before appeared in front of them. "Trying to escape, I see." Bright yellow eyes narrowed into slits as the mysterious villain spoke in an eerie tone. "I won't let you." 13 placed herself in front of the students. Some were shaking in fear, others were trying to stay calm. The villain continued to speak. "We are the League of Villains. It may be presumptuous of us, but we have invited ourselves into the home of the heroes, Yudata High School, in order to have All Might, the symbol of peace, take his last breath. I believe All Might should have been here. Has there been some kind of change?" His question was met with terrified looks, as the students continued to quake in fear. The villain said nothing as his mist began to expand. "Well, that is neither here nor there. This is the part 1M to play." 13 extended her arm forward and one of the caps on her fingers popped open. Just as she was about to use Black Hole, Kirishima rushed forward, set dead on, taking the villain down. His fist, hardened from his quirk, missed the villain and created a small hole in the ground. Dust emerged, blocking some students' vision. "You think we're just gonna sit there and let you?" He grinned, his sharp teeth sticking out. The villain didn't waste a second and soon they were all surrounded by purple mist. The last thing Katsuki remembered was shouting before he was thrown into the unknown. "Why is everything so wet?" Izuku blearily opened his eyes, slowly realizing he was underwater. Panic began to settle in as he tried to swim to the surface. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure swimming towards him. His eyes widened as he realized it was none of his classmates. His body froze as he watched the villain come closer and closer, and then wham! Azui slammed her foot on the villain, pushing him further in the water. Izuku barely registered the feeling of something slimy wrapping around his waist before he broke surface. As soon as he landed on something solid, he fell to his hands and knees. He began to cough water up, greedily taking in gulps of air. Once he had succeeded in ejecting the water from his lungs, he looked around. He was in the shipwreck zone. That much was obvious. Besides him, Shinso and Azui were staring at him. After learning what their quirks were, he devised a plan. Shinso brainwashed some of the villains and got them to get closer to the boat. Izuku used his telekinesis quirk to pull the rest of them closer. Then he used One for All to create a whirlpool as a distraction. Azui grabbed both of them and launched them away from the villains. They were at the edge of the water, prepared to go back to the front when Shinso spoke up. "Shouldn't we go and see if Sensei is okay?" There were a lot of villains. Although Shinso was faced away from them, gazing in the general direction Aizawa went, Izuku could sense the worry radiating off of him. Izuku agreed, and even though Azui was a bit hesitant, they began to go towards the center of USD. When Katsuki became aware of where he was, he realized he was in the ruin zone. Besides him was the red-haired kid, Kirishima. Surveying the room, he duly noted there were around a dozen villains there, ready to attack. To his left, Kirishima was also doing the same. Hardening his skin, Kirishima looked towards Katsuki with a reassuring grin on his face. "Don't worry, I got this. Stay behind me." With that, he charged forward at one of the villains. Katsuki huffed. He didn't need anyone protecting him, thank you very much. Ignoring the red-haired teen's orders, he charged forward, the first aid kit laid carefully behind him. One of the thugs charged at him. The thug had purple skin, and the immediate danger Katsuki saw was the dagger in his right hand. Katsuki ducked as the thug swung the dagger at him. Quickly taking the upper hand, the blonde grabbed the attacker's wrist. He tightened his grip, and the attacker let out a yell in pain, dropping the dagger. Katsuki, grip still tight on the man's wrist, kicked the thug in the kneecaps with as much force as he could muster. He heard an audible crack. The man screamed in pain and fell to the ground. He stabbed their neck with his fingers, successfully knocking the thug out. "Serves him right," Katsuki thought bitterly. Note, never pisses off a medic. After all, they know all the weak points to the body. He turned as another thug came running towards him. Kirishima, having not seen he had single-handedly taken a guy out on his own, shouted in surprise. "Bakugu!" Katsuki dodged a punch and jabbed at the guy's throat, successfully knocking him out. He turned towards Kirishima, who was looking at him in shock. Distracted by what he just saw, Kirishima failed to notice a thug approaching him from behind. Not even wasting a minute, Katsuki dashed forward just as the attacker was about to hit the redhead. Katsuki caught the thug's hand and, using momentum, he grabbed the attacker's arm with full strength and tossed him over his shoulder. The guy landed and was knocked unconscious from the fall. Katsuki once again huffed and wiped some dirt off his shirt. Ignoring Kirishima's gaze, he walked over to his first aid bag and picked it up. Adjusting his glasses, he finally turned towards Kirishima. The teen was looking at him in awe and admiration. His eyes were so wide Katsuki feared they might fall out. Mouth agape, the hero in training, continued to gaze at him, feeling uncomfortable. Katsuki cleared his throat awkwardly. That seemed to snap Kirishima out of his thoughts. He closed his mouth and his eyes lit up in excitement. "That was amazing." Katsuki winced at his volume. Kirishima noticed and spoke in a quieter tone. "How did you do that? You just took out those guys in like a second. Dude, that was so cool." Katsuki allowed himself to smile a little. "It's not that impressive. I took self-defense classes when I was little, and as a medic I do know all the weak points of the body." "Not that impressive? Dude, you just took out 3 villains in like 2 minutes. Katsuki looked at the unconscious forms laying on the ground with a critical eye. These villains all seem like small fries to me. Just thugs that were picked up off the streets." Kirishima nodded in agreement. Together they made their way out of the ruins section, planning on regrouping with 13. Well, that was the plan. Aizawa let out a scream as his arms were crushed by the Nomu. Izuku, Shinso, and Azui were all frozen in fear as they watched their sensei being crushed by the monster. There was another crack as the Nomu applied pressure to Aizawa's ribs with its knees. Aizawa let out another pain scream. The 3 students could only watch, helpless as Aizawa's head was smashed into the ground. Shinso began to move forward, ready to help, but Azui held him back. The purple-haired teen had tears running down his face as he watched his father's head be smashed into the pavement. He struggled to get free, but Azui had a strong grip. In a hushed whisper he spoke, his tone urgent. "We have to help him." Izuku shook his head sadly. "There's nothing we can do. If we interfere we will only get in the way. That might make it worse for him." Izuku observed the scene a little more. Standing slightly behind the Nomu were two figures. One of them was the one with the decay quirk, the one who had decayed Aizawa's elbow. He had been silent most of the time. The other was someone who hadn't done anything this whole time, therefore they knew nothing about him. He made slight rude comments here and there, other than that he left everything to his blue-haired partner. They seemed to be looking away from the scene in front of them. Before Izuku could theorize as to why, the warp gate guy showed up again. "I have failed Tamura Shigaraki. A child managed to escape. The pros will be arriving soon, we should go." Izuku felt relieved and he studied the blue-haired villain's expression. He was slumping now and seemed to exhale in relief. Questions immediately filled Izuku's head. Why would he look relieved? Before he could ponder on such questions, the villains began retreating back. Are they leaving? Shinso asked in disbelief. Azui looked bewildered as well. Just as the villains were about to leave, the blue-haired one stopped. He clutched his head, slightly pulling at his hair and began mumbling. His partner looked concerned, as he continued to mumble. Eventually he stood up straight and turned towards the students. His expression was blank, but his moves seemed hesitant and almost regretful. He stalked towards them and reached out a hand to Azui's face. Izuku felt himself begin to panic and think of what would happen if he were to activate his quirk. The hand was coming closer now and all of them were frozen in shock. His fingers made contact with Azui's face and the villain looked over his shoulder. He then spoke for the first time during the whole attack. "You really are cool, Eraserhead." They looked towards where he was looking and couldn't believe what they saw. Aizawa was staring right at the villain, hair levitating as he strained his eyes. The Nomu slammed Aizawa's head back on the ground. Izuku quickly leapt up and spat fireballs at the villain. In a flash, the Nomu appeared in front of the villain unaffected by the fire. Tamura continued to reach towards Azui and Shinso, intent to kill. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion in Izuku's eyes. The seemingly harmless fingers were coming closer and closer to his classmates' faces, ready to cause destruction. Izuku felt helpless as death seemed to inch closer. The Nomu was reaching towards him now and Izuku was fairly confident that this was it. He was never going to be a hero, he was never going to see Katsuki's smile again, or kiss those sweet lips. He was going to die. But then the entranced slammed open. Everything froze and Izuku looked up in shock. Shock soon turned into relief as he saw who it was. All Might was here. And he was not smiling. All Might stared at the scene in front of him, anger bubbling up inside. When he had been on his way to the USJ, he certainly wasn't expecting to meet young Ida halfway. The look of fear and urgency on the kid's face was enough for All Might to rush over. It doesn't matter that his time is almost up. How dare these villains come into his school and endanger his students? Don't worry, he spoke to the quivering students behind him. 13 laid on the ground, back all torn up. Mina looked up at him, tears of relief wheeling up in her eyes. "For I am here." Down below the thugs, who had woken from unconsciousness, were prepared to fight. All Might didn't waste a second. 1 second, he was at the top of the stairs, then soon he was all the way down. The thugs around him were knocked unconscious, not even being able to register what happened. All Might snatched Aizawa from where he was laying. All Might felt a pang of shame and sadness fill him as he gazed at Aizawa's broken face. Crimson liquid poured down the teacher's face. His eye was twitching slightly and he was just barely breathing. Cuts littered his face, and the whole left side of his face was covered in blood. He felt his stomach churn as he noticed both arms were hanging uselessly at his sides. The skin on his elbow was chipped away and All Might felt worried about whether his eyes were damaged in the fight. "I'm sorry, Aizawa." Damn it, if only he had come in time. Looking towards his left, he spotted Shinso, Izuku, and Azui looking at him in shock. In a flash, he grabbed them and knocked the hand off the villain's face. He gently placed the students and Aizawa down. "Everyone, go to the entrance. I'm leaving Aizawa to you. He's unconscious, hurry." Shinso was already ahead of him. He gently pulled one of Aizawa's arms around his shoulder and Izuku did the same on his other side. He looked worried but determined. Once Aizawa was secure, they began to walk towards the entrance. Izuku hesitated for a second, worried about All Might. As if sensing his distress, All Might looks at Izuku and says, "No need to worry, young Midoriya, I am here." With that he dashed forward, engaging the Nomu in a fight. The three students continued to trudge on, but Izuku found himself hesitating. He knew All Might was reaching his limit. Scratch that he had reached his limit, but was continuing to push himself for their safety. Just like Aizawa. It was dangerous work, being a hero. And this attack showed Izuku and his classmates the horrors heroes face on a daily basis. After a few moments, Izuku glanced back at All Might. His classmates followed his gaze and a startled gasp made its way past their lips. All Might was in bad shape. The Nomu's fingers penetrated his skin, digging into his side. Both villain and hero were trapped in some sort of portal, as the Nomu continued to dig into flesh. Izuku absently noted that he was digging into All Might's weak spot. The two other villains were standing aside watching as All Might tried to pry the Nomu's fingers off. Despite how sticky the situation was, All Might put on a facade of confidence. He met the Warp Gate villain's cold stare with a look of pure confidence. "This is your first offense?" he asked mockingly, voice booming. "You'd better prepare yourself." The villains were simply unaffected. Izuku glanced at them. The blue-haired villain was scratching at his neck absently. The other was standing beside him and pulled a hand up. Feeling tense, Izuku's thoughts went zooming at the possibilities. Was he gonna attack? Finish All Might off? What if he noticed them? CRP. Mentally bracing himself, Izuku watched the scene with intense apprehension. The scarred man didn't do any of those things, surprisingly. He simply placed a hand over the blue-haired villain's hand that was scratching his neck, restraining him from continuing. He mumbled something and the other stopped scratching, letting his hand drop. The black-haired villain then looked up. He seemed to watch the scene in amusement. He let out a laugh. "You think that's our plan?" he sneered. "Just barraging you and hoping you just die?" He barked out another laugh. "Kurogiri, show him how wrong he is." There was no time to react. Slowly All Might and the Nomu began sinking. In a calm voice, the mist, Kurogiri, spoke. "Normally I would despise the idea of having blood and guts overflowing within me. But I would be happy to if it means taking in someone as great as you." All Might looks around, internally panicking. He struggled against the Nomu's grip. Kurogiri continued to speak. "You are too fast to see with the human eye. Restraining you was the Nomu's job. And then, when your body is halfway in, to close the gate." The portal began to close around All Might, who continued to struggle. "And tear you apart is my job." The teens watched on with horror. Seeing that he had to act quickly, Izuku made a decision. "Azui." She looked at him. "What is it, Midoriya?" Without looking at her, he gave his response. "Trade places with me carrying Mr. Aizawa." She looked confused but complied. "Karo? But why?" Izuku didn't answer. He looked determined, but on the inside he was worried. His feet moved on his own, mind blank as he picked up his pace. Someone was shouting his name, but he couldn't tell who. He was solely focused on running. Tears welled up in his eyes. All Might couldn't die. He just couldn't. There were still so many things he had to teach them, to teach him. With a silent apology to Katsuki and Inko, he leaped forward desperately. Kurogiri appeared in front of him, and for the second time that day, Izuku thought he would die. Everything seemed to be going in slow motion. He was slowly icing closer and closer to the portal, closer and closer to death. He had accepted his fate, seeing no way out of this. Just as he was mere inches away from Kurogiri, a blur of red caught his attention. All of a sudden, Kirishima came out of nowhere and slammed himself onto Kurogiri. He had activated his quirk and grabbed onto the metal part of Kurogiri. Slamming the villain to the ground, Kirishima smirked. Then, ice began to take hold of the Nomu and Izuku followed the trail of ice a little confused. His eyes widened in realization as he gazed at Todoroki. A set of footsteps beside him caught his attention. He looked to his side and was met with the sight of Katsuki running towards him, first aid kit in one hand. He blinked in surprise. Kacchan! The blonde slowly came to a stop beside him. With analytical eyes, he gave Izuku a once-over. Nodding to himself in satisfaction, his gaze moved to Izuku's face and they made eye contact. He smiled at Izuku. I'm surprised you haven't broken a bone yet. Izuku chuckled a little. I decided to heed your warning. Smiling a little wider, Katsuki took a good look at the scene in front of him. Kirishima had pinned the mist villain down, Todoroki had frozen the Nomu, and the two other villains were just. But the situation seemed controlled. He was more worried about All Might. The pro-hero pried the Nomu's fingers off and leaped into the air, landing beside Todoroki. They all stood ready for a fight. The Nomu began sinking into the portal once again and eventually, it emerged from it. Its arm and leg, which were frozen, broke off into pieces. The monster let out an inhuman screech, falling on its knee. All Might crouched down and put a hand out, signaling the students to stay behind him. Get back, everyone. The students watched on with wide eyes. Even though his body's broken, he's still moving? Izuku asks in shock. To everyone's surprise, the Nomu's limbs began to grow back. As the leg finishes forming, it stands up. All Might also stands up, surprised. What? I thought his quirk was shock absorption. Stuffing his hands into his pockets, the black-haired villain barked out a laugh. We didn't say that was all he had. One hand came out of the pocket as he gestured casually at the Nomu. This is just his super regeneration. He smiled a sinister smile. This guy's been designed to take you at 100%. He's pretty much a super efficient sandbag if you think about it. His companions snorted at his partner's description. The pro-hero and his students were disturbed by their lackadaisical attitude. The villain looked at them through half-lidded eyes. I suppose first we need our gate back, Nomu. With ungodly speed, the Nomu headed towards Kirishima, fist raised ready to attack. No one had time to react. In less than a second it was in front of Kirishima. Izuku, Katsuki, and Todoroki were all blown back by the power of the attack. When the dust cleared, they didn't see Kirishima. Kirishima! Izuku cried out, only to stop once he looked beside him. On the ground, Kirishima laid propped up on his hands looking shocked. His eyes were wide in shock and he looked unharmed. Katsuki dropped down beside him. He scanned him up and down. Are you injured at all? Katsuki already knew the answer to this question but decided to ask anyway. And no, I don't think so. I hit my head slightly but I think that's it. Katsuki pulled a small flashlight from his first aid bag. He shined it in Kirishima's eyes. Upon seeing his pupil constrict, he put the flashlight down. He mumbled something that sounded like, just to be sure, and asked Kirishima some basic questions. Where are you right now? The USJ building at U. What's your name? Ijiro Kirishima. Birthday and age, please? October 16th, age 16. Good, no concussion. Satisfied, Katsuki stood back up. He glanced at the others. Was anyone else injured? Todoroki and Izuku shook their heads before Izuku suddenly remembered something. Wait, Mr. Aizawa. He looked at Katsuki with urgency in his voice. He got hurt real bad, he pointed towards the entrance. Azui and Shinso are taking him to the entrance. Katsuki nodded and picked up his first aid bag. I'll go see what I can do, you guys should also head back. All Might had this hand. Katsuki was cut off by insane laughter. The four of them turned towards the source. The scarred villain was gripping his sides, doubled over in laughter. He was laughing hysterically while his blue-haired companion was looking at him blankly. Once he had calmed down, his gaze met theirs. Why, you think that we're just gonna let you go? He barked out another laugh. Oh God, that is just priceless. Wiping a tear away from his eye, he stood at full height. His playful facade had washed away and was replaced with a terrifying look. He grinned maniacally at them and advanced forward, his companion following after. Izuku placed himself in front of Katsuki. Go! He yelled, head turned slightly to his shoulder, making brief eye contact. We've got this. As much as Katsuki wanted to argue with that, his duty as a medic came first. He nodded determinedly and began running towards the entrance. Izuku got into a fighting stance, fist raised. Beside him, Kirishima activated his quirk and Todoroki readied his ice. The black-haired villain didn't waste a second. A burst of blue fire emitted from his fingertips and fire came hurtling towards them. Kirishima leaped out of the way while Izuku fought fire with fire. He took a deep breath and exhaled, blazing red fire combating blue. Both fires were extinguished by each other and Izuku took a minute to glance at his companions. Kirishima was dodging blow after blow from the blue-haired villain. Todoroki looked a little helpless, trying to find an opening to freeze the villain. Izuku couldn't look on for much longer. His attention was brought back by another burst of flames hurling towards him. He quickly dodged and advanced towards the villain hoping to find an opening. Todoroki! Mismatched eyes looked up. Use your ice to combat his flames. The teen nodded and advanced closer towards them. A burst of ice shot out and advanced towards the villain. Suddenly both flames and ice stopped. Confused, Izuku looked to see what stopped them. Shudo and the villain had locked eye contact. They were both staring at each other, eyes wide and mouths agape. For a few moments, they just stared at each other in shock. The villain snapped out of it first, and he took advantage of the situation. Blue flames burst from his hand and shot towards Shudo. The Yudata student was still frozen in shock when he felt something pull at him. Izuku pulled him away from the flames with his quirk and spat a fireball at the villain. This is no time to freeze up Todoroki, he said. His voice was firm but there was an underlying layer of anxiety in it. Shudo snapped out of his daze and he shot ice at the villain. The villain simply dodged. One thought came across Izuku's mind as he advanced towards the villain once more. I hope Katsuki's doing better than we are. Shinso! Azui! Katsuki ran towards them, immediately spotting the limp body they were carrying. The two of them turned towards him. Bakugu? Thank God you're all right. Shinso looked relieved but Katsuki noted he still looked somewhat worried. He nodded at the purple-haired teen and sent him a smile. He shifted his attention to the body, Mr. Aizawa. The medic's eyes widened as his gaze fell upon Aizawa. He quickly ordered the two of them to put him down. Once he was resting on the ground, Katsuki crouched down beside him. Checking his pulse, he found that it was weak. Cursing slightly, he quickly opened his first aid kit. Deciding to start with the head first, Katsuki pulled out the necessary materials to clean the wound. As gently as he could, he began wiping away the blood and dirt. While he did that, he decided to ask how the hell this happened. Azui gave a brief explanation and Katsuki pursed his lips. Without the proper equipment, Katsuki had no way of telling whether any permanent brain damage. It was also likely his orbital floor was almost completely destroyed, so the chances of him seeing again were very low. His arms were almost completely shattered and Katsuki had no doubt his ribs were as well. As for his face, he would most likely guess facial fractures. But he couldn't know for sure without the proper equipment. He applied pressure to the wound on his head gently, while also cleaning some small cuts. Shinso crouched down beside him, looking at his father with worry in his eyes. Katsuki had successfully stopped the bleeding and was now gently wrapping gauze around the underground hero's head when Shinso spoke up. Will he be all right? Katsuki bit his lip, unsure of how to respond. He finished bandaging his head and now moved on to the arms. He was definitely gonna have to realign the bone. Before he did that, he decided to address Shinso's question. I'm not sure. Katsuki avoided looking at the two students' worried faces. He should heal fine, but I'm not sure if he'll be able to see again. Based on what you two told me, his orbital floor was most likely shattered. He heard two sharp intakes of breath and avoided eye contact. He took a deep breath and looked them straight in the eye. I need to snap the bone back into place. For that to happen, I need you to hold him down. This isn't gonna be pretty. They looked scared but nodded determinedly. Azui pinned his legs and lower body, while Shinso did the same with his upper body. Taking a deep breath, Katsuki quickly snapped the bone into place. Aizawa's eyes flew open and he let out a pained yell. Shinso shushed him gently. It's all right, Dad, you're all right now. The hero was breathing in exhaustion as Katsuki splinted the arm and wrapped it in bandages. He created a sling and gently put his arm in it. Katsuki now moved on to the other arm. This time he decided to give Aizawa a heads up. Mr. Aizawa, I'm gonna realign the other arm now. I'm sorry, but this is gonna hurt. In response, the pro hero spoke through gritted teeth. Just do it. Katsuki nodded. On the count of 3, 1, 2, snap. He snapped it back into place. Aizawa let out a pained grunt and breathed. Working silently, Katsuki wrapped the arm in a sling. Aizawa wasn't breathing anymore, but his breathing was still uneven. He seemed confused, which didn't surprise Katsuki at all as he couldn't see. Where? Who? A series of coughs followed after that along with a pained groan as his ribs were jolted. Try not to move too much, sir. You were severely injured in a fight against the villains who infiltrated UA. You are currently in the USJ building. Aizawa tried to sit up. TT the students. No. Need to PP protect them. Sir, I'd advise you to lie back down, Katsuki said while pushing the hero back down. Your students are all safe, All Might showed up just in time. The hero seemed to relax at his words. Hi Hitoshi. The purple-haired teen smiled, tears rolling down his face. I'm here, Dad, I'm fine. The pro-hero relaxed even more. Katsuki was inspecting his ribs when they heard a loud shout. They all minus Aizawa looked up sharply. Izuku seemed to be yelling something at Todoroki as the black-haired villain advanced on them. Sheet, they didn't seem to be doing so well. Aizawa struggled a bit to sit up again. That WWSM Midoriya. I thought you said they were safe. Katsuki sighed. They are, sir. Izuku, Todoroki, and Kirishima are fighting two of the villains right now, but they are perfectly capable. The teacher struggled more. I need, let me fight. Dad, do you love me? Shinso spoke, surprising them all with the unexpected question. Of course, dash. He suddenly went quiet and froze. Good, then go to sleep. It then occurred to them that Shinso was using his quirk. Aizawa went still and relaxed. He was asleep within a few moments. Katsuki nodded gratefully towards Shinso. He then continued to inspect the ribs. Concluding that he couldn't do anything about it, he stood back up. Footsteps were approaching them and he looked towards the source. Uraraka and Shuji were heading towards them, offering to lend a hand with Aizawa. The brunette used her quirk to float Aizawa away from the scene. They all began walking back, but Katsuki couldn't help but glance and see how Izuku was doing. His face paled as he gazed at the scene. Izuku was clutching his arm, which was burnt slightly. Kirishima was struggling to find an opening and Todoroki wasn't doing much better. Katsuki came to a quick decision. All Might had just yeeted the Nomu in the sky but didn't seem like he could help them. He turned to Shinso. Go on without me, I have an idiot to save. Shinso looked hesitant to let him go. Eventually, he nodded, not doubting his combat skills. Katsuki took off. Before he came in their line of sight, he stopped. Narrowing his eyes, he analyzed the Deciding to take the flame villain out first, Katsuki snuck behind him. He quickly pulled a knife from his boot and lodged it into the villain's leg, immobilizing him. He leaped away to avoid being attacked and landed beside Izuku. I thought I told you to be careful. I was never good at following instructions. Katsuki huffed, ignoring Todoroki's inquisitive stare. Todoroki, go help Kirishima, we have this handled. The teen seemed hesitant but complied nonetheless. Izuku and Katsuki prepared themselves for a fight. The black-haired villain had stood back up, despite the bullet in his leg. He advanced towards them and Katsuki braced himself for the worst. Turns out he didn't need to. Gunshots echoed throughout USJ. 4 bullets lodged themselves into the blue-haired villain and 1 lodged itself into the villain they were fighting. There was only one pro-hero that had a gun. Snipe. Katsuki relaxed. The heroes had arrived. It's been a while, hehe. So sorry about the lack of updates. This story is not abandoned, I promise. I'm in a bit of a rough patch mentally right now and found little inspiration to write. I'm still not really in a great spot, so please be patient with me. I will try my best to update as soon as possible. Putting that aside, thank you for all the kind comments and review, it really helps. Also, I know I said there would be Eraser Mike in this chapter, but I decided to make that next chapter. This chapter is fairly short and lighthearted. Enjoy! The first thing Izuku noticed when he awoke was the hushed voices around him. He strained his ears to try and understand what they were saying, but to no avail. Racking through his brain, he tried to recall what had happened. Like a truck slamming into him, he suddenly remembered all the events that took place. Ise, Aizawa, the Nomu, All Might. But how did he end up here? And where exactly is here? Stretching his fingers out, feeling a soft blanket. The smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils. He strained his ears again, trying to focus on the hushed voices once more. Will he be all right? All Might. Relief washed over him. He was okay. But who was he talking to? Scratch that, who are they talking about? A second voice tore him from his thoughts. His injuries were not that severe. Thankfully he didn't use one for all again. He just had a second-degree burn. But he probably won't wake up for another 30 minutes. Recovery girl, so he's probably in Recovery Girl's office. Seems like they're talking about him as well. Slowly he pried his eyes open. A blinding light greeted him and he squinted. Once his eyesight had adjusted, he scanned the room. Recovery Girl and Toshinori had yet to notice he was awake. The former was at her desk working silently while the latter was sitting up on his bed. Pulling his gaze away from them, he tried to focus on why he was in Recovery Girl's office. Wincing as he moved his arm, he remembered the burn he had gained from one of the villains. His wince alerted Recovery Girl, who was at his side in an instant. "Good you're awake," she said in a hushed tone, which made Izuku confused. Why was she whispering when he was already awake? Seeing the confusion on his face, Recovery Girl gestured to the chair next to him. It was only then that Izuku was aware of the presence next to him. He turned his head and was met with spiky blonde hair. Katsuki had his head resting on his arms, sleeping peacefully. One of his hands was wrapped around Izuku. The injured teen noted with amusement that Katsuki had fallen asleep with his glasses on and were now smudged against his face. Recovery Girl looked over his wound once more, nodding in satisfaction once she saw it was healed. She said it would still be sore for a couple of days, but he could leave once Katsuki woke up. She would have told him to wake him up, but Katsuki looked so tired. Currently, Izuku was running his unoccupied hand through Katsuki's hair, while talking quietly with Toshinori. Feeling Katsuki begin to stir, Izuku removed his hand from where it was tangled with the other's hair. Katsuki lifted his head up sluggishly and was greeted by a soft kiss on his forehead. "Good morning, Jaravining, Sleeping Beauty." The blonde readjusted his glasses, the remaining traces of sleep fading away. Taking a moment to analyze the room, Katsuki slowly recalled what happened. Sitting up quickly, he gently tugged Izuku's injured arm towards him. Feeling relieved that it was healed, he met his boyfriend's amused stare. Izuku smiled at him and Katsuki felt himself relax. The heroes arrived in time, no one was injured severely except for Eraserhead. As he smiled back at Izuku, he made a mental note to visit the pro hero in the hospital. Without a word, Katsuki pulled the taller teen into a hug. He clutched the back of Izuku's shirt, hands curling into fists. Refusing to let tears fall, he spoke in a choked whisper. "I'm so glad you're okay." Seeing Izuku fighting against a real villain, while clutching his arm in pain affected Katsuki more than he liked to admit. The blonde remembered the pure panic that shot through him, as he acted without thinking. Admittedly, he prefers not to engage in combat and tries his best to avoid it as much as possible. Two strong arms circled around him and clutched him tightly. He felt moisture on his shoulder as Izuku cried in relief. "I'm glad you're okay too." Burying his head in his shoulder, Izuku spoke in a slightly scolding tone. "You should have just gone to the entrance. You could have gotten hurt. Plus I had it handled." Katsuki pulled away and raised an eyebrow. "Oh really? I seem to remember you were about to be reduced to ashes until I stepped in." He snorted and shook his head. "Anyway, someone has to save you when you're being reckless." Izuku placed a hand against his chest in mock offense. "I feel offended that you have no confidence in me. And to think I thought you loved me." In response, Katsuki stuck his tongue out childishly. As laughter filled the dull room, Katsuki felt his heart lighten. They were gonna be alright. Hisashi was having a bad day. A very bad day actually. As you could imagine, finding his husband's near-lifeless corpse was not exactly a pleasant experience. Running a hand through his unkempt hair for the 10th time that day, he sighed as he gazed at his husband's face. Although there wasn't much of his face that was actually visible, he thought bitterly. White bandages contrasted heavily with the dark hair that surrounded it. Hisashi let his gaze wander, analyzing his husband's condition for what seemed like the 100th time. To ease Aizawa's breathing, he was hooked up to a ventilator. The breathing mask looked odd on his husband's face, which was mostly covered in bandages. His arms were resting on his chest, the rest of his body was covered in a light blanket. The hospital room was quiet, except for the small beeping of the heart monitor. Most people would brush the sound off as annoying. But Hisashi clung to it. He clung to it with both hands, praying it won't go flat. Each beep was like a little drop of hope for Hisashi. Hope that his husband will recover. Hope that today will not be remembered as a tragic death, and instead the triumphant survival of a hero. Hands shaking, he gently ran his fingers through black hair. His composure slowly slipped and he let out a choked sob. Tears blurred his vision as his shaking became more violent. Bending over in his chair, he continued to sob. It scared him. It scared him knowing how close he was to losing Shoyuta. Today, he was aware that Shoyuta wasn't quite out of the woods yet. He begged the universe to not take away the love of his life. He clung desperately to the rise and fall of his chest, letting the sound of the heart monitor comfort him. He shuddered as he muffled his sobs with his hands. It was odd, Hisashi thought sourly, to see his husband this lifeless. He was normally too stubborn to lie down, even with the worst of his injuries. Before he could continue that train of thought, a soft groan caught his attention. Zashi. Slurring slightly, Shoyuta spoke barely above a whisper. Hisashi stroked his hair again, smiling sadly. Hey Sho, he spoke softly. Without warning, Shoyuta suddenly shot up. A groan of pain emitted from him and Hisashi gently pushed him back onto the bed. The man under him struggled against his grip relentlessly. I need to, breathing in exertion, Shoyuta continued to struggle. Stew, dense, are perfectly safe. The blonde interrupted him as his lover stopped struggling. Seeing that he was still tense, Hisashi continued to reassure him. They're all fine, no one got hurt, thanks to you, he cooed softly. At his words, Shoyuta slumped and relaxed. Wordlessly, the underground hero allowed himself to be guided back onto the bed. It was quiet for a moment, as Hisashi once again began carting fingers through black hair soothingly. Hurts, Shoyuta managed to mutter out and Hisashi looked at him sadly. I know, hun. But recovery girl can't heal your injuries until you've rested a bit more. So why don't you try to get some sleep, alright? He continued to card his fingers through Shuta's hair and began to hum softly. Slowly his husband was lured back to sleep and Hisashi let himself cry once more. 2 days later found him in the exact same position as before. Hitoshi had come in the day before, demanding to see his dad. He had refused to leave the whole day until he eventually fell asleep in the evening. As much as Hisashi wanted to stay, he knew it'd be wise to head home with Hitoshi as neither of them had eaten anything. So he took Hitoshi home and fed him and they both got some rest. The next morning, Hisashi woke early and left to visit Shoyuta. He would have brought Hitoshi but the kid barely got sleep on a regular day so he thought it'd be best to let him sleep. So here he was, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair scrolling on his phone mindlessly. He wasn't really expecting much that day, so when the door cracked open he jumped in surprise. Fighting to regain his composure, he blinked and turned towards the door. Instead of seeing a doctor or nurse or even Hitoshi, although Hitoshi could have burst through the door loudly, he was met with an unexpected sight. Rubbing his neck in a sheepish manner, a short spiky-haired teenager stood. He had bold red eyes that hid behind thin-framed glasses. The kid seemed to almost curl into himself under his critical gaze. A red oversized sweater covered his torso and he wore dark jeans with white Converse shoes. The kid shuffled awkwardly and Hisashi snapped out of his gaze. A warm, inviting smile, the same one he used with fans, broke out across his face. Before he could apologize for making him nervous, the kid spoke in a soft tone. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to scare you." Continuing to rub his neck, the kid avoided his gaze nervously. Quicker than he meant to, Hisashi waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it, I wasn't paying attention." His unexpected visitor relaxed slightly. "What brings you here?" Immediately he mentally berated himself. He was obviously here to visit Shoyuta. The question was why. He didn't recognize him as one of the students Sho taught. "Oh well, you see, I just wanted to visit Eraserhead and see if he's alright." The kid's gaze was fixed upon the form laying on the bed. Sensing his confusion, the kid answered his unspoken question. "Bakugo Katsuki. I was at the USJ attack. I had gone with Class 1A for some experience in the medical field." Retaliation dawned on him as he vaguely remembered Shoyuta telling him something about that. Now that he thought about it, didn't he have a kid in his class by that name? Analyzing the kid once more, he looked deep into his memory. Short, spiky-haired blonde. Wasn't he the kid that shot electricity? No, he was the one kid from General Studies, right? Realizing he had been staring too long, he beckoned Bakugo over. Yes, sorry my mind's a bit scrambled right now." It was his turn to smile sheepishly as he smiled at the kid. He motioned towards the second chair. "You're welcome to come join me." The kid smiled gratefully and sat down, shifting away from him slightly. He ignored the strange gesture politely and instead made some small talk. Eventually, the kid seemed to gain more confidence and eventually asked, "Will his eyesight be all right?" Startling at the question, his response was a little delayed. "The doctors aren't sure, they don't want to get our hopes up, but it seems like it will be all right." His companion breathed out in relief. "That's good, I tried to do the best I could at the time, but I'm afraid I wasn't of much use." The kid admitted, looking guilty. Frowning slightly, Hisashi quickly reassured him. "That's not true. The doctor said you did a pretty good job at stopping the bleeding and setting the bones. Thank you for looking after him." He smiled genuinely, hoping the kid would relax a little more. They continued to chat and Hisashi found himself enjoying his companion's company. It was only after 30 minutes or so when Bakugo looked at his watch and stood abruptly. "I'm so sorry, but I've got to go now. Hopefully, my boyfriend hasn't found some way to get himself in trouble." An amused smile grew on Bakugo's face. Hisashi himself couldn't help but chuckle. "Based on what I've heard so far, I wouldn't be surprised." Which was true. Based on what he has seen and heard from both Shoyuta and Bakugo, the kid sounded like a trouble magnet. "I love him, but I would appreciate it if he didn't try to give me a heart attack every day." The kid sighed and shook his head. Hisashi couldn't help but sympathize with him. After all, that's how he felt when it came to Shoyuta. "I'm sure he's fine, and even so he'll have you there to patch him up." The lighter blonde smiled at him and began to walk to the door before freezing. Hesitation slightly, the kid turned towards him. "I don't really know your husband much, but based on what I saw that day at USJ and what Izuku tells me, he's a fighter and I'm sure he'll be fine." Smiling at Hisashi's disbelief, he chuckled slightly. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." Gaping at him, Hisashi scrambled to find his words. How? You're wearing a ring around your neck that matches the one on the side table." Cursing silently for his carelessness, Hisashi rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. The kid smiled at him and left, the door clicking closed behind. And all Hisashi could think was, "A strange kid. This is kinda short, sorry. By the way, this takes place directly after USJ. Warning. Description of injuries." Falling on the wooden floor with a thud, Tenko bit back a groan of pain. His arms and legs were on fire and he could feel himself bleeding out. "Stupid hero's bullets lodged themselves in both my arms and legs," Tenko thought bitterly. "Sheet, this isn't good. Surround Superscript 1 isn't going to be too happy about this." Scrambling to get up, Tenko tried his best to fight through the pain. He knew that if he didn't, the punishment could be way worse. Unfortunately, his body had other plans. Yelping out in pain, Tenko stumbled backward, mentally bracing himself to be met with more pain, but was instead pleasantly met with familiar arms wrapping around his torso, keeping him upright. Allowing Tuya to support him, He tried to block out the overwhelming pain. Slowly his mind cleared and he glanced at Tuya, scanning him for injuries. Aside from the bullet wound in his shoulder, he seemed mostly uninjured. Catching Tuya's wince, it dawned upon Tenko that holding him like this was probably hurting his shoulder. Not wanting to cause him more pain, Tenko struggled to get out of Tuya's grip. In response, Tuya just tightened his grip. Looking into his eyes, Tenko saw only desperation and fear. Realizing that Tuya needed some support right now, he stopped struggling. His small boost of adrenaline wore off, allowing the waves of pain to rush over him once more. Breathing in exhaustion and pain, Tenko forced himself to stay alert. He felt dizzy and tired. Looking down, he suddenly became aware of the fact he was oozing out blood. So that's why he felt so tired. Realizing he has yet to acknowledge his surroundings, he analyzed them warily. They were back at the bar, that much was obvious. Kurogyri was in the corner, looking as stoic as always. While it hurt to see no concern in his gaze, Tenko understood why he had to remain so. Sauron had strict orders that were unwise to disobey. Of course, that never stopped Tenko and Tuya from being disobedient. Which, in hindsight, was always stupid of them because they ended up paying for it in the end. Moving on, Tenko startled as an unfamiliar figure sat at the bar swinging her legs carelessly. In his pain-filled state, he vaguely recognized her as the woman Sauron was talking to earlier that day. He stared at her suspiciously before his mind clogged up with pain again. Satisfied, Tenko slumped in exhaustion. Closing his eyes, he could practically feel the worry radiating off of Tuya. He wanted to reassure him, to let him know he was fine. But the exhaustion and pain were just so overwhelming. Maybe he could sleep just for a little bit. A deep, humorous chuckle echoed throughout the room, causing the two injured teens to straighten. Tenko snapped his eyes open, mentally berating himself for letting his guard down. Almost immediately, he recognized the tall figure hiding in the shadows. Who is it, you ask? Sauron, Satan, piece of shit. AKA all for one. And he did not look happy. Superscript 1. Sauron is the main antagonist of Lord of the Rings. I do not own him or Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien does.